Cyberpunk, Shiny and Chrome. 81. Chapter 81. Intervention. Michael Magos Sobranov. The little cafe in Arroyo B at D had chosen for our meeting spot turned out to be a place so unnoticeable and out of the way, my first thought as I parked my war machine was questioning how the hell the place was still afloat. Then I walked in and saw the complete lack of lighting and guests, and the dust-covered tables and shelves, and quickly concluded that it was very much so not afloat. Logos reacted to my spike of doubt before I was done fully conceptualizing it. No danger detected. Thank you. I sent back, slowly letting my suspicion dissipate. Caution was good, paranoia was not. Also, I tried convincing myself the only way B at D could have theoretically betrayed me without dying in the process was informing Netwatch about my companion and bolting as far and fast as they could. But I had known them for years now, and they were not big fans of our new associates to boot. Also, they had days to do it, and didn't. If that wasn't proof they weren't going to fuck me over, I don't know what was. I detected a ping from the room behind the bar counter and sending a quick one back, walked on inside. The metal doors squeaked as I pushed them open and I stepped into another dark room, the sole source of light being a large screen displaying a paused video game. My optics allowed me to see everything clearly though, and I immediately zeroed in on an oddly familiar sight. Namely, a small hill of blankets covering the source of an agent signal. A thin, pale hand rose from the pile, followed by a quiet, almost inaudible, "Yo." "Good evening." I slowly pushed the door behind me closed. "Already?" My audio receptors caught the whisper hiss. "Yes, it's like 8. I droned. "Sun's already set." They, or rather she, sighed. "Figures." Her hand poked out again and she waved. "Come on, sit down. I got us some kibbles." Mentally frowning at the slight stutter I did as I was asked, quickly deciding to forgo the very fragile-looking chair in favor of just folding my legs on and sitting on the floor, I took a handful of the stuff and quickly chewed it down. "Dog food, yay." "Fucko off." She flipped me off just as I finally looked up to see her face, and I found myself somewhat thrown off by what I saw. She looked to be some mix between Asian and Caucasian, with black hair, most of which I couldn't see due to all the blankets over her head, and deep bags under her dark brown optics. Interestingly, her cyberware load appeared to be minimal, and aside from a very high-quality neuroport, she lacked any other mind interface implant, including an inbuilt cyberdeck. Logos wasted no time in displaying his scan of the nearby rooms and the high-grade external deck and runner chair combination. Most notable of all, however, was the fact she kept fidgeting and refusing to look at me fully. "Hope I'm not too scary," I said, momentarily questioning my choice of not putting my skin on for the day. "Nah," she shook her head. This is probably better." "If you say so," I said, sounding only half as unsure as I felt. "Oh, fuck it," she suddenly said, reaching for a nearby injector and shoving it into her neck with the ease of practiced familiarity. A few things became apparent then, the multiple injection marks spread all along the same vein, and the fact the compound she just shoved down her veins was a very potent anxiolytic combined with a solid mental stimulant. Knowing this city, that probably meant some deep-seated trauma-induced anxiousness. And I just forced her to invite me to her safe place. Way to fucking go, Mike. She closed her eyes and inhaled. "Phew, I hate that feeling." The usual reaction is quite the opposite, I point out. Her eyes snapped open, now far more alive than moments prior, not when I know it will leave me loopy as fuck later. She shoved most of the blankets off, revealing a rather thin build, and gave me another wave. "Cool to finally meet face to face, though. You are one big motherfucker. Even bigger in person." "Thank you, I built myself." "Ha ha ha." She rolled her eyes. I made a point of slowly looking her over. But really, I didn't expect the famous Big B at D to be a shut-in girl failure. Truly, you live up to your hype. Her face scrunched up. "Go fuck yourself." My response is an instant no. Worth a try." She shrugs. "Name's Mary, by the way." "Michael." I returned to her seeming surprise. "So this is where you live?" "Whenever I'm not trying to hide out from whichever corp I pissed off this month." She smirks. "Used to be my dad's before." She pauses and shakes her head. "Never mind." Well, it certainly has. Charm. I decide on distracting her from whatever memory she was stuck in. It's a fucking cave, don't even pretend. You said it, not me. I shrug. So, she claps her hands and decides to move on. You wanted to meet up, and here we are. What now? And wasn't that the question of the day? What exactly was I trying to accomplish here? Scare her into compliance, satisfy my own doubts, looking my colleague of multiple years over, and the state of her killed any desire I had for the former, and the latter was mine to deal with anyways. It all felt so very pointless. Honestly, I say after a full minute in my own head, this whole thing was a spur-of-the-moment decision. Say what? She slumps forward with an incredulous look on her face. Look, I was scared shitless about people finding out about Logos. I try to explain my thought process from back then, so I went for the thing that usually works, intimidation. And when I folded like a little bitch, you still didn't have time to cool down, is that it? Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, that makes sense. She nods along, and just as I'm about to relax, she explodes. The fuck it does. There it is. I nod to myself, having expected this. I've been scared shitless for a days, thinking my brain was going to be turned into AI food, and now you're telling me I did that shit for nothing. You know the fact Logos didn't immediately turn you into a snack should have clued you in, I point out weakly. Shut up. She looks like she wants to strangle me to death, but knows better than to try. I've got enough shit to stress about without your gonk ass making it worse. Look. I raise my hands placatingly. You got some solid dirt on me and I panicked. And that makes everything fine, does it? She snaps. No. I say firmly, but it doesn't change the fact I was forced to trust you with far too much. I'm not the only one depending on me, and risking that for any reason isn't a particularly pleasant experience. A long beat of silence passed between us. Well, shit. All of the energy leaves her as she slumps back into her couch. Fucking hell, Em. Now I feel like a bitch. And I feel like an asshole. Welcome to the club. I huff. A few seconds pass before she snorts. We're both fucking gonks, aren't we? Yes, this whole people thing is still confusing. I chuckle. She rolls her eyes. Says the rich ripper with a main line. Just because it confuses me doesn't mean I'm not good at it. I shrug, earning a quick middle finger. Jealousy is not a good look. Yeah, well, her eyes heat up briefly, but she holds back whatever she was going to say. Fuck you, I'm rich too, so there. She huffs. You still got the scary doggo on you? I do. I nod. Greetings. Every single audio device, up to and including Mary's agent, rings out with the synthetic voice. She shudders, still terrifying. You get used to it, I shrug. Besides, Logos is very friendly. Fren, we both get the mental equivalent of a nod. Yeah, sure, totally makes sense, she says sarcastically, while slowly covering herself back in blankets to try and push away the discomfort. You sure you can keep that thing, Logos? She corrects herself, under control. Directive 1, link to creator. Logos' message echoed in my mind alone. He's not the only AI in town who doesn't want to kill everything. I shrug. Don't worry, you aren't getting mind-eaten or whatever wacky fantasy you've come up with. Her eyes narrow. You don't get to say that shit when I saw what it did to Brigitte. Probably. I finish with a small grin. She closes her eyes. Did anyone ever tell you you are an asshole? I'm sure it happened once or twice. I hum. I tend to filter that stuff out. Gee, I'm so surprised. She says dryly, well, I'm too drained to be scared anymore. Still got a good 2 hours on my boost, though. She nudges her chin at the screen. Wanna play some games? Really? I tilt my head in surprise. Yeah. She smirks a bit. I've known you for over 4 whole-ass years, and this is the first time you aren't trying to act all spooky and talking all rat-like. About damn time we had some actual fun. Personally, I find butchering a bunch of cultists perfectly entertaining, I say as I get up and reach for the spare controller. But I don't mind beating your ass in a game of your choosing for a bit. Oh, you're screwed now. She grins and she switches the game she had on for one of those addictive clicker games that require both memorization and reaction time. I did my best to hide the sheer wave of malicious glee as she started the first round, and my Karen was able to follow everything in slow motion. Needless to say that by the time I left the odd little cafe, one going by the appropriate name of the dead end, as I've found. Both of us had thoroughly moved on from the whole hidden AI situation and fought over another thing entirely. That being my natural superiority in gaming, of course. Logos, being too curious to just observe, decided to appear in B at D's perception a couple of times, gauging her reactions and even accepting a terrified head scratch while in his metal doggo of death form. His mimicking of an actual dog-like reaction, tail wagging included, probably made Mary more relaxed around him than anything I could have ever said. Still, even while a part of me remained suspicious, I decided a bit of genuine companionship was a far better insurance than any potential blackmail I could have come up with. Logos did leave a tracker daemon in her OS, though. No amount of trust was worth risking my family. And if it helped me save her ass from a stimulant OD, that was just a happy little accident. A day later, I was busying myself assembling what remained of my combat drone selection for the trip. Some live testing would have been good, but with all the meetings and planning, I barely had the time to relax, much less perform some live testing on the local scum. My self-proclaimed apprentice in net running could probably make good use of them, but I was quite done giving her handouts, especially after she tried getting Rebecca to convince me to keep tutoring her for free after her little rite of passage. She refused, knowing how busy I was, but the attempt was still made and remembered. The second option that came to mind surprised even myself, as our rocky start, or was it restart, seemed to encourage B at D into bothering me further, instead of making her reasonably cautious of my attention. Then again, anyone capable had their quirks, and anxious as she was no coward. But I quickly squashed that line of thinking. She was a bit more open now, yes, but that was nowhere near enough for me to entrust her with even more of my secrets. A sudden message from Rogue marked as urgent stopped me from considering the issue further. Magos, we have a problem. We? I didn't bother pausing my work as I processed that. Did you fail to get the permits from the Swiss? The Swiss were understandably rigorous when it came to enforcing security on their territory. Being one of the wealthiest places on Earth with an actual living standard for their people meant they had to keep the rest out at all costs. So a fully armed Fullborg visiting was obviously going to be under a lot of scrutiny, even if the reasoning and assumed length of stay reduced that massively. I could almost respect them, if not for the fact they decided to replace the vast majority of their military and police forces with droids. You know, the lethal war machines that could be hacked by a skilled netrunner, and the small army of incomprehensibly potent AIS sequestered off in the old net. It's like they were asking to get super murdered if a breakout ever happened. But knowing our corporate overlords, they probably compared the risk projections against a cost-benefit analysis and still found it perfectly acceptable. Not like they would ever be under any real risk, or at least so they liked to believe. Rogue's quick response drew me back from my thoughts. No, those went perfectly fine. It's your VIP. For someone who was supposedly going to call me over, the man was really taking his time. Something happened to him? He hasn't been answering my calls, and I need you to go check in on him. My eyes narrowed in irritation, and I finally stopped my tinkering. I didn't know I agreed to be the man's babysitter. Yes, you did. Also, I'll pay for this separately. Why did they never lead with that? Fine, send me anything I might need to know. I'll head out now. Good. Hurry and be ready for anything. A moment later, a data packet arrived alongside a special code that should allow me to approach Eurodyne's North Oaks mansion without immediately getting on the NCPD's shit list. The cops tended to get very testy when people tried approaching the private residences of that district without an invite. Though as I drove up to the quite frankly resort-like palace, at least when compared to the rest of the city, the man lived in, I found myself scowling in deep disgust at what I found. No security guards anywhere, merely a thin, see-through perimeter wall and some cameras. For one of the most famous people in the city, Eurodyne's security was insulting. I was just about to approach the intercom when I caught muffled shouting in the distance, coming directly from within the home. I had already leapt over the fence in one fluid movement, leaving any alarms to be dealt with by Logos, before I even started registering the words being said. The first voice was a deeply frustrated plea. Listen to me, Kerry. I've already given my word. If we pull out now, we'll be sued all the way to the streets. Then get the fuck back to the street where you belong, you fat fuck. It was the rock star's familiar if ragged voice that did most of the shouting. What's next, huh? You going to sell my ass for the next fucking rat that asks? Is that it, Donny? No, of course not. The increasingly panicked voice of what I presumed was the manager assured him I'd never do something like that. But selling my soul is fine then, is that it? Think about Ted and Kim, Kerry. The manager's voice turned low. This could affect them. Out. Kerry. Get out. Look, man, Get the fuck out. Holy shit. The manager's voice turned panicked, and I heard heavy steps start coming to meet me. Just in time for a shot to go off. I stepped aside as the rather corpulent manager practically stumbled out of the mansion, completely failing to notice me looming over his side as he ran for his life while clutching his arm. Amusingly, there was no wound to be found, but the panicked man would probably not realize that for quite some time. Taking this as an invitation, I slinked in through the closing doors and into the massive mansion, quickly finding the living room and the VIP slumped over a coffee table made from actual wood, holding a masterpiece of a revolver in his hands and muttering to himself. First the crew, then Louise, and now Donny. He whispers, shaking his head and downing a shot of whiskey before looking back at the gun again with something approaching longing in his eyes. Maybe I should just... And that's as far as I let it go as the gun disappeared from his grip, now gripped firmly in my artifacts, a good 5 feet away from the man. A surprised yell ripped its way out of his throat as he stumbled back, rolling aside only to go completely and utterly still as he saw me looming over him. Apologies, I informed him, but Ms. Rogue paid me to keep you alive. The world-famous rock star just kept staring at me for a good 10 seconds before suddenly throwing his head back and laughing like a lunatic. I'm starting to think this job might be a bit more difficult than originally expected. 82, Chapter 82, Intervention, Part 2 of 2. The rocker boy. What the fuck was his life anymore? Oh, this is rich. He let out one final pained chuckle as he wiped his face and stared up at the blank-faced corpo toy soldier the old bitch got her hands on. Can't even blow my own brains out without someone butting in. The Borg didn't react except for slightly tilting his chrome head. I wasn't aware Kerry Eurodyne was a little bitch. He was already on his feet and swinging by the time his brain caught up. Shut the fuck up, you tin fucking can. He barely even registered the sting as his fist struck the metal face. You don't get to come into my fucking house. Another strike. Take my fucking gun. Another, and project your fanboy bullshit. He was breathing heavily now, the pain in his arm no longer possible to ignore as he hissed and covered his clutched fist with his other hand. Maybe I'm a bitch, he said bitterly, but at least I didn't sell my body and soul for a chrome shell. The blood-smeared face of the cyborg remained expressionless. Are you done? No, I'm not fucking done. He snarled. What? Not even going to pretend you aren't some corpo slave rogue loaned out to keep me nice and behaving? Can you even say it? Now who is projecting? Instead of getting angry, the Borg's bored voice turned amused, if anything. Knowing exactly what was implied, he exploded again, fuck you. Riveting retort. The Borg drawled and caught the swinging hand, and like one might treat a pouty kid, tugged at the arm until the mangled hand was in front of his face and quickly sprayed it with something. Kerry barely managed to keep himself from groaning in pain as the cold, stinging sensation spread all along his limb. For your information, you are completely wrong. The Borg informed him as he did something to the hand. I just didn't care about your dumbass opinion enough to correct you. Kerry made another tired laugh at that, hiding a wince as his hand arm was shoved back at him. Whatever you say, tin can. Hand should be fine now, the Borg told him. Can't have the investment, not able to play. He scoffed as he rubbed the rapidly healing skin, and getting no response, he felt himself deflate, letting out a deep sigh as he slowly walked over to his drink cabinet. He set the bottle down on the low table alongside 2 shot glasses. Done pouting? Asked the murder machine, now leaning against a nearby pillar with his arms crossed. Eat shit and sit down. Kerry flipped him off. The Borg did as he was asked, slowly lowering himself on the floor opposite him. Somewhat calmer, Kerry couldn't help but stare at his own blood, still covering the chrome face. Not gonna wipe that off. Are you kidding? The cyborg asked. To the right, freak. This bit of paint is worth a fortune. Kerry shuddered and promptly decided to change the subject. How the hell did you get in here anyway? Your security is dog shit. The Borg informed him, there is a good reason Rogue hired me to keep your insides inside. If you're going to jerk yourself off about running the edge, like the best of them, you can shut the hell up. Kerry scoffed, pouring the whiskey into both glasses and shoving one at Rogue's pet chrome fucker. Don't flatter yourself, was the response he got, alongside a light thud of plastic hitting wood as what looked like a business card landed on the coffee table. Mere money wouldn't have been enough to make me go all the way to Europe. Kerry whistled as he looked the card over, turning back to the cyborg just in time to see him down his shot through a Moore straight out of an old horror vid. She got me the whole ass package, huh? Only the best for Night City's favorite cheerleader. The Borg, or Margos as he had just learned, drawled back. Fucker. He cursed and downed his own drink, speaking only after a few silent moments. So what now? You gonna stay here to make me go play circus monkey? Throwing another tantrum already? The Borg's response was as calm as it was unamused. Forcing down another spike of anger, Kerry glared. And what else does a man do when he can't control anything about himself anymore? Two golden eyes shone with mockery. You're the corporate sellout here, you tell me. Great, Kerry sighed. At least I'm not the only clown here. Margos clicked his tongue. You obviously can't tell the corpos to fuck off without wasting everything you achieved, or at least most of it. Thanks for reminding me. So you go after the next closest thing. And that is? It was the manager who fucked you. The Borg's mouth appeared again as he grinned or smirked. Kerry wasn't sure, so you make him into an example. I'm not going to fucking kill him, he protested immediately. Even if he sold your ass and blackmailed you. The golden eyes narrowed. I'm not some psycho. Kerry frowned. He is going to get replaced anyway. With someone else who will just sell your ass again. Margot shrugged, completely uncaring about how much his casual dismissal irritated his VIP. You've been in the big money for ages, but somehow you still think you can avoid the power plays. You going to say something actually useful, or do you plan on just talking shit? Well, you have to send some kind of message, the Borg hummed. Otherwise you are just asking to take it up the ass again. Kerry's frown deepened, but then he remembered Donnie bragging about his newest buy a week back. He was on his feet before he finished remembering the conversation, a mostly filled bottle of whiskey in his hand, as he started walking to his garage. You said you were paid to keep me alive, right? About sums it up. The slowly rising cyborg nodded. Then pack up. I decided to take your advice. So long as I don't have to listen to any more of your bitching. He threw the tin can a middle finger and kept walking. Then he paused and grabbed another bottle. Michael Magos Sobranov. Need me to hold that up for you? I asked as I looked over the disguised rock star wobbling under the weight of my rocket launcher. Nah, relax. I got it. He grit his teeth, aiming the 4-barrel weapon at a top-of-the-line bright red Caliburn, a vehicle so utterly overpriced even my VIP would wince at paying for it. A vehicle belonging to his manager and sitting right outside of his high-end Charter Hill home. Eat shit, Donnie, Kerry shouted and depressed the trigger, loosing a cycling swirl of rockets at the unsuspecting vehicle and almost managing to miss with every single one. The security fence in front of the house detonated, sending imported dirt and grass in each and every direction and only batting the car aside. Before I could mock him for his ineptitude, though the car suddenly let out a piercing whine of gas escaping through a tight and then detonated, setting whatever hadn't been blown up on fire. Passable. Feel better now? I asked the grinning musician. He didn't seem to notice me for a few moments before absently nodding. Good, I said, and promptly dragged him off and away from the balcony we had requisitioned from its absent owners. I ignored the man's protests as I essentially ragdolled him away from prying eyes and back to my van. He nearly toppled over as I set him down. What? He choked on air for a split second. What the fuck was that? He demanded with a glare. You decided to do this in the middle of the day. I informed the gonk, in Charter Hill. He took a sharp breath and glared up. And you couldn't have told me to wait? And listen to you bitch and moan for half a day? Do I look like I have that kind of patience? Don't look like much of anything, he muttered and downed another gulp of his drink. He had already gone through the first bottle, and this one was nearing its end too. The fact he managed to keep it with him was both horrifying and impressive. "You want to punch anyone else in the face, or can we get going?" I ask the drunk rocker. He gulps down the rest of the drink and wipes his mouth. "We can go, just stop by Caliente's. I need some coffee after this shit." Quickly finding the address, I nod. "Sure thing." Kerry turned much more tolerable after getting his frustrations out in a more productive manner, but by the time I had dragged him home, the whiskey had already started hitting him hard, and he barely managed a half-hearted rehearsal to reward me. Dumbass still thought I was a fanboy, before passing out in the bathroom. After having made sure the grown-ass man was nice and tucked in, I found myself leisurely driving back home with the sunset. "Good call on provoking him, Logos," I say aloud as I mentally typed out a curated report for Rogue. Attempting to reason with someone during a mental break would have been counterproductive. Still felt weird to act that familiar with someone I don't know. I shook my head. Definitely not my thing. Limiting options based on vibes is also counterproductive. "No shit." I huffed and viewed the return message I got from Rogue. "Looks like we are flying out early in the morning, and we'll be meeting some old friends too. I recommend making sure Mr. Uridine is actually present before takeoff." "You know, the fact that is a reasonable concern bothers me more than it should," I muttered. The weakness of the flesh displayed once more. I hissed as I reflexively sped up and nearly rammed into a nearby car. "Oh, you did that on purpose." He knew how I got around the topic. Of course he did. He was in my head. I will neither confirm nor deny this statement. Increasing the music volume to banish that line of thinking, I floored the gas on purpose this time and made for home. The next morning came far too quickly, despite the utter lack of sleeping involved, and I spent none of it on preparations save for the 10 minutes I needed to pack everything up. "You're sure you don't want us to come with you?" Mom asked as she pointlessly checked over my freshest and most protective coat. "We'll be boarding at Orbital Air with a world-famous musician in tow." I shook my head. "I'll be hiding my features as much as I can, and frankly, I don't want you anywhere near that kind of clusterfuck." "What? Think we're scared of some fangirls?" Becca grinned from nearby, still perfectly snug in one of my hoodies despite her increase in height. "No reason to risk things." Yeah, she pouted, shoulders slumping. "No point in painting targets on our backs." "Don't worry." I smirked down and poked her. "I'll be back before you know it." She perked up. "And you will bring us all of the things." "Some of the things," I corrected. "I don't even want to imagine the level of overpriced the Swiss are capable of reaching. Just imagining a souvenir shop aimed at the ultra-rich made me shudder in primal terror." She narrowed her eyes. Fine, but it has to be something good." Mock bowing, I declared, "As the lady commands." She nodded in smug satisfaction before she stopped pretending and enveloped me in a hug. "Try not to have too much fun without me, Mike." "I make no promises," I chuckled. Mom was the next to hug me. "Come back safe." Now that, I straightened my spine, I can promise. I made one final round of checks on my gear and set out to see the world. Finding the team Rogue had prepared for me was as simple as walking into the Orbital Air Center and following a few directions to a separate room, even if the local security was understandably less than enthused by my presence. At least they were professional enough to point me along without urinating. "Mr. Sharp." I nodded at the old Englishman as I approached the duo Rogue had unsurprisingly chosen. He looked pretty much the same as he did when I first met him, and every time after that. Dressed in a dapper three-piece suit and groomed to something approaching perfection, and with a posture that must have been repeatedly downloaded directly into his brain. "Ah, Mr. Magos," he smiled genially, "it has been some time." "Too little?" My other teammate snipped in, though something told me that was mostly in reference to Sharp. "Ms. Kimigawa," I greeted her next, "I see you are adapting to NC's particular style." The merc assassin, whose hair was now highlighted by neon green and whose clothes were now far more colorful than the previous combination of black on black, scoffed, "Used to stick out like a sore thumb, so something had to change." "You looked like you were trying to sneak in somewhere." I pointed at her. "No wonder you drew eyes wherever you went." I'm afraid that must simply be our dear Ms. Kimigawa's natural charm at work. Sharp's moustache twitched in a way to indicate him smirking, and ignoring the woman's glare, he went on, "Has our charge already arrived?" Mentally pinging Logos, who then pinged Delamain, I got the answer in less than a second. "He's almost here," I said, waving for them to follow me. "Best we go and make sure no one tries to jump the fence and cop a feel or something equally degenerate." Probably wise. Sharp hums and follows along. Kimigawa does the same, though with a lot more silent grumbling. The scene outside was perfectly peaceful, however, at least when compared to my expectations anyway. The massive crowd that had gathered to catch a glance of the local rocker legend was kept thoroughly out of the way by way of an actual electric fence, and to top it all off, there was a small platoon of guards watching them like hawks. The road was kept equally clear, and soon enough the AI-run taxi passed by the checkpoint, though not without a pair of particularly enthusiastic fans slipping through what I quickly identified as a fresh crack in the fence. They were quickly rewarded with a beanbag to the chest each. I'd pity them, if not for the fact they consciously chose to compete for the day's Darwin Award. Well, ascribing consciousness to them might be a bit too generous, I admit. The Delamain cab parked right next to us, and I already felt a mild headache coming on as I saw Uridine on the back seat, head slumped backwards and audible snores just barely catching on my audio receptors. Might as well get this over with. I sighed internally. "Hey Del, care to let us grab Mr. Uridine? We are on a bit of a timer, I'm afraid." "You are expected, Mr. Margos," the AI said, and the doors on the back opened on their own. I reached in to shake the man awake, but all I got for my trouble was an annoyed mumble of 5 more minutes. Slowly looking back, I saw an amused Sharp and a face-palming Kimigawa, and decided I'd had more than enough of the little shit. Which is to say, I promptly pulled a suddenly very awake Kerry Uridine out of the cab by the scruff of his collar and dragged him into the air center. Absently, I wondered if V was having a less irritating time of it on her end. The Corpo, walking through the Japan Tokyo HQ, was like visiting a different planet when compared to the NC Tower, and that was saying something. Everything was massive, and so utterly sterile she could confidently guess she was on the moon base and probably be right. Still, she wasn't given any time to sightsee and was redirected to the boarding area almost the second her flight landed. Keeping hold of that familiar disappointment from showing on her face was second nature by now, and after waiting for the scanner to do its thing, she confidently stepped onto the launch pad, only to immediately stop dead in her tracks. "You look like a cut of fuckable meat." The deep growl came from the skull-faced head suddenly looming above her. "Are you?" 83. Chapter 83. Leaving the Nest. The Corpo. The expected drumbeat of her twin hearts never came as she stared up at the boogeyman himself, Adam fucking Smasher. In fact, save for having to keep the hair trigger on her Sandevistan under control, she felt surprisingly little panic, despite the very real threat to her life looming over her. She was still cautious. She knew the man by reputation, both in core and out of it, and who didn't? But standing in front of something that could quite easily rip her to pieces faster than she could even see it was just not all that terrifying anymore. Exposure therapy was a hell of a drug. So she put on her best corporate bad bitch face, not interested. The malicious stare somehow turned even more threatening. "You sure about that, meat?" She managed, just barely, to keep her reaction under control, not giving an inch. 3 seconds passed before the cyborg was satisfied and pulled back to his full height. "You've got some balls for a half-meat," he said with a dark, synthetic chuckle. "Doesn't make you worth a damn, so get moving. We already had to delay once, and if someone fucks it up again, I'm going to get violent." She bit back the excuse about her incompetent pilot and followed the agitated war machine's stomping gait to the personal Arasaka family shuttle, paying no mind to the dozen or so cyber ninjas who seemed to almost stare through her as she entered. Soon she found herself waiting through another scanning session, a heavy security door blocking the way forward and a quartet of silent valets standing around them. A silent chime signaled the process was complete, and she waited for Smasher to start leading the way again, only for him to step aside and address her. "Get in, the kid wanted to talk to you before we took off." Valerie barely had the time to process the words when she noticed one of the valets flash the cyborg with a glare, and in the next second, the air was ripped through by a loud snap as what had once been the valet now painted the wall. Smasher slowly lowered his extended hand, unbothered by the bits of blood and viscera dripping from the clenched fist as he repeated, "Get in." The other valets had gone sheet pale, none of them so much as daring to look up, save for the one standing next to the fresh coat of paint, quietly calling for cleanup and a replacement. Jesus fucking Christ! Valerie cursed inwardly as she suppressed a full-body shiver and, not being a complete idiot, quickly did as she was told. The doors shut behind her, and she immediately felt a difference in the air. It was clear, almost natural in a way she only really felt at resorts, and the furnishing was not that of a passenger plane, but of a full suite in the classic Arasaka exec style. The Japanese one, not the scraps the NC branch was thrown. But she did not have any opportunity to properly gawk, as her eyes remained firmly set on the room's sole occupant, or just under him, as company etiquette dictated. "It seems we are to be delayed again," said Yorinobu Arasaka in Japanese, his tone completely unhurried. "Sit, Ms. Price." "Thank you, Arasaka-sama." She bowed her head and followed the order. Arasaka-sama would be my father, the corporate heir said with careful neutrality, and then switched to English. "Yorinobu will do for now." "Of course, my apologies, sir," she said, still not meeting his eyes. Thankfully, he did find any reason to be annoyed with her and moved on. "Now you must be curious why the Night City branch has been given the honor of participating in this outing." "Fuck no, the less I know about this clusterfuck the better," was what she wanted to say, but not being suicidal, she settled on, "It was surprising." Indeed, and while most of my father's employees, it sounded almost like he was tasting the word as he said it, are a rather insular group and content to ignore the Americas, it was decided that allowing a branch to act with as much independence as Night City was not in the company's interest. She most assuredly did not gulp as she nodded. "So, Ms. Price," Yorinobu Arasaka went on, "as a senior counterintelligence operative, you must have an approximate understanding of all the little factions and interest groups operating within the branch. Would that be correct?" She offered a firm nod, smashing the little hesitation rising in her chest. "Yes, sir." "Excellent. You will inform me of everything you know," he ordered. She might have preferred it if he just gave her a gun and told her to shoot herself. "Haven't even taken off and things have already turned to shit." She cursed inwardly and then spilled everything. Michael Magos Sobranov. The thrum of the massive luxury AV cruise liner's engines took some considerable getting used to before it turned into proper white noise, allowing me to relax ever so slightly while still keeping my eyes peeled on everything. It was kind of amusing in a sense, the way people usually looked at bodyguard duty. You stand around an important person, remain calm and quiet until someone tries something, and then commit the ultra-violence you were so generously paid for. It was Nova as fuck, right? No one ever wants to talk about the sheer soul-sucking tedium of it. Hours upon hours of standing around while having to pay close attention on everything that was going on around you, watching everyone and everything for even the smallest trace of danger. Cyberware only made the tedium that much more necessary. Because one wrong twitch you don't notice, bam, your charge is dead and your rep is now in the landfill. Thank God I had the arrogance to build Logos, because doing net Overwatch at the same time would have probably driven me up the wall. Overthinking detected. "Why, thank you, Logos, very helpful." I thought only half sarcastically as I focused fully on the space around me. I was standing inside a lounge, still cramped due to the fact we were in an AV, but spacious enough to hold a small bar and a few tables for the guests, as it was a luxury liner. Currently, I was the only one accompanying our hungover VIP, as he tried and miserably failed to bluff the other guests out of their money in a game of cards, myself standing just off to his side and watching the other players for any signs of enthusiasm about the day's Darwin Award. Fortunately, they looked to be happy just passing the time while robbing a burned-out singer blind. As for my teammates, Kimigawa was currently snoozing off in a wall capsule so she could take the late-night shift when we landed, and Sharp, well, he was currently having a deep, spirited discussion with Kerry's manager about the planned concert and its security arrangements. He was also trying to keep the man from committing suicide by nihilist rocker too. The corpulent man had arrived just barely in time for the AV's takeoff and immediately began behaving like absolutely nothing had happened in the last few days, patting Kerry on the shoulder and laughing at his own stupid jokes, at which point the now thoroughly awake Uridine proceeded to bowl him over and wail on him with all the rage of his impotent attempt on my own face. Sadly for Donny, his face was not of the bulletproof variety, and by the time the rock star had gotten his satisfaction and the few security officers on board gathered enough balls to try and approach us, the fat man had spat out a good number of his teeth and lost consciousness. Thankfully, some stimulants had him back up and running, now with the added bonus of an appropriate level of enthusiasm for the occasion. The teeth were another story, but he didn't need those to do his job, so none of us were very concerned over it. Fucking finally, Kerry hooted as he dragged all of the chips on the table to himself, having just swindled the other players out of their money like the worst of them. The other guests grumbled and quickly decided they didn't feel like playing anymore. Pussies, Uridine snorted as they made their excuses and left. They probably noticed you're cheating, I flatly pointed out. Yeah, and? He asks, scowling. If they had any balls left, they should have thrown a punch at least. Letting out a slow, deliberate exhale, I place a hand on his shoulder, making him look up as I stared down at him like he was a complete fucking idiot. What kind of a suicidal moron tries to stab someone over some money while there was a fucking Fullborg looming over them? I lightly squeeze his shoulder. I was standing right behind you. And of course, he doesn't give a single fuck about the logical explanation as he snaps his fingers, exactly what I pay you for. You don't pay me, you gonk, I deadpan. Don't sweat the small stuff. He waved it off. Now how about you stop doing your best impression of a statue and play a few games with me? You do realize I'm supposed to be a bodyguard here, right? By this point I spoke as if I was talking to a particularly slow child, and everyone else already fucked off. He grins. Come on, we've got time to kill anyway. Fine. I sigh and tell Logos to pay double the attention. I don't mind embarrassing you for a while. You ever play? He asks as he begins to deal. No. I shrug. But I've seen enough. Famous last words. Half an hour later, the previously enthusiastic rocker sat slouched forward, his eyes completely free of all will to live and thought, as he stared down on the table where all of his chips had been methodically removed from his possession. No one ever thinks about just counting the cards. Well, that was fucking embarrassing. He sighs and sits up. I think I've had enough poker for the day. No, really? Really? He gives me an annoyed glare. How long until we arrive anyway? Should be just under 2 more hours. I say after a rapid mental query, what are your plans once we get there? The concert, his face twists with resigned frustration, is gonna happen in 2 days, so we've got time to kill before that. Alongside the corporate gala, I remind, you really believe that charity bullshit they're spouting? He looks at me incredulously. Fuck no. I scoff. You can't deny it is an important event though. Consequential. A bunch of rats licking each other's assholes, he practically spits out. Those rats have money and guns. Lots and lots of guns. I know. He nods begrudgingly. So plans? I repeat the question. He went to respond when the nearby doors opened, letting Sharp walk in alone. Mr. Uridine, Mr. Magos. The old man nods and takes a free seat. How is Donny? Kerry asks, audibly disgusted with the mere mention of him. Shaken but not stirred. Sharp's moustache twitches. He appears to be laboring under the impression he is going to be working his way back into your good graces. As long as that misinterpretation persists, we should have no issues with attempted retribution. So pretend I don't want to punch his face in to avoid a headache, Kerry asks slowly. Quite. Sharp nods and pours himself a drink. Kerry sighs, sinking into his plush seat while rubbing his closed eyes. Just keep him away from me. I'll deal with it when we return to Night City. Enough about corporate bullshit. He sits up and claps his hands. Let's talk about something less infuriating. Like what? I ask, absently reading through another scan of the entire airship. Like music. Kerry grins. What do you fine fellows enjoy? Sharp hummed. I find I'm quite partial to the old classics. There is a certain elegance in purity of the old compositions. Got to respect our roots. Kerry nods along and then looks at me. What about our smasher mini-me? You know there are a lot of Fullborgs out there. Never mind. I sigh at his shit-eating expression and just answer, tinnitus. I could almost hear the record scratch in his head as he registered my words, and it was time for a shit-eating retort of my own. It is quite soothing to the audio receptors. And this is how I found myself being dragged into the gonks room for some necessary, his words not mine, education about music. Some people just couldn't appreciate a good sound layering. Still, playing a guitar was not as boring as I thought it would be. What did I miss? Kimigawa asks, as we walk down the AV's massive ramp, staring at a long stretch of thin band-aid tape under Kerry's left eye. Mr. Uridine here, I say in my most neutral tone, thought it would be amusing to make me his circus monkey for the day. The man in question just winces as he tries not to agitate the skin by speaking. And apparently telling the anti-pick elitist my fingers can pass for knives didn't stick. I shrug innocently. So I may or may not have slightly damaged his guitar strings. And when he tried showing off, they snapped at his face. Kimigawa asks dryly before snorting, "Holy shit, dude, for a rich guy you are unlucky as fuck." Oh, haha, Kerry rolls his eyes. Well, as amusing as this all is, I think I speak for all of us when I say agitating our hosts by holding up the line is not in our best interest. Sharp says, even as his tone is laced with amusement, we really should move along. Agreed. I nod and we keep walking, and as we fully exited the AV and stepped onto one of the many landing pads on top of the Zurich Aeronautics Center, I found myself stopping once again. Because all half of my line of sight was filled with green, actual grassland and forests stretching as far as the naked eye could see, and almost as far as the cybernetic one could, only growing sparse as the ground started to rise into mountains that went so far up they hit the clouds. The sight was beyond beautiful. Immediately I took a few dozen pictures and saved them to my hard drive. A slight cough drew me back to reality as I found Sharp giving me a knowing look. "Mr. Magos, Ms. Kimigawa, I understand this is all very new to you, but please, we wouldn't want to keep the fine officers waiting." Kimigawa sent him a glare, while I merely nodded, the both of us ignoring Uridine's look of playful mockery. Hefting the box of personal musical equipment I was apparently volunteered to carry, I followed them as we approached a line of mass production-grade droids, if I had to guess. Boxy but not oversized mono-optic heads, thin bodies slightly below average human height, and simple but effective-looking submachine guns. All of them looked completely the same and carried the same equipment, no doubt unnerving our less-than-combat-oriented co-passengers. I quickly crushed the temptation of deep scanning them on the spot and settled with a mere surface-level observation. Definitely stealing one before we leave, though. Affirmative. Only one actual person stood waiting for us as he waved an old pair through and turned to our group, looking us over with completely biological eyes that seemed to dilate far too quickly to be normal, turning into tiny pinpricks as they landed on me, only to move on a split second later as he faced Kerry and said, "Papier bitte." When he gave him his papers back, I almost dared hope that would be that. But then he demanded an entire list of identifications from me and examined them with autistic levels of scrutiny, all the while shooting me suspicious glances every 3 or so seconds. Prick would have probably continued on for a whole hour longer, if not for the commotion the other passengers were starting to build up to. Thankfully, whatever legalized magic Rogue scrapped together for this seemed to satisfy the stick rammed into the customs officer's asshole as he very reluctantly gave me a special pass to enter the city. Fucker should learn to control his envy better. That was just sad. Throwing that whole situation to the back of my head, I allowed a bit of my earlier excitement to return. The locals may be cunts, but exploring one of the richest cities of one of the wealthiest European states sounded downright nova right about now. 84, Chapter 84, The Zurich Gala. Michael Magos Sobronov. Got bored listening to the same song get rehearsed for the umpteenth time? I ask as the steps behind me come to a halt. I didn't bother turning way from the sight of a distant sunrise, still chewing my premium burger and savoring every bite while my legs dangled off the side of the penthouse balcony. Say what you will about our VIP, but the man barely treated us like random bodyguards dumped on him by Rogue, and more like a trio of chooms he brought along for a fun trip around the globe. He could have very well requested we don't make ourselves noticeable while with him, and we would have no reasonable basis to object. The job was keeping him alive, not hanging out. But instead we got fed elite restaurant-level food and got dragged around Zurich for a fun if tense night out in town. Kerry got into 3 different fistfights despite me literally looming over him the entire time. The man was talented, just not in the way he thought. Whenever the depressive musician wasn't busy acting out, however, I found our stay to be more than pleasant and even managed a few hours of solo slinking while the rest were back at the apartment to grab all of the souvenirs I'd promised to get. My looks naturally drew caution wherever I went, but the locals were polite so long as I remained the same, and save for us sharing curious glances at each other, they were weirdly cyberware averse and mostly spent their resources on bioware and even exotic modifications. All I had to deal with for my intrusion was a small squad of police droids openly paying attention to me. Perfectly understandable, really. Shame I didn't have time to explore the many museums and parks in any depth, but I could always do that on my own time and dime in the future. Just curious what you were up to. Kimigawa's mild response draws me back to the present. She was leaning against a nearby stone pillar that held up the glass ceiling above the balcony, looking well rested and prepared for the day. You've been sitting out here for most of the night. Mostly enjoying the view and trying to burn it into my brain. Zurich is a beautiful place, even if the weirdos are too quiet. I say with a light chuckle, no crowds, no shouting, hell not even gunshots. The place was practically a tomb. But I've also been browsing the local net scene. I add, for all the good that did me. What do you mean? It's all over-sanitized corpo slop. I scoff, shoving the rest of my meal down my throat. Everyone talks the same and thinks the same. It's like they were fucking programmed. And the only couple of actual runners prefer to keep to themselves. Not that I can't understand their decision. Were you expecting an NC gaming lobby or something? She asks, amused. You joke, but I'm not blowing things out of proportion here. I shake my head. The way they act on the local net is fucking eerie. Like being surrounded by a fucking spam virus, honestly. Yeah, I get it, she says, obviously not getting it. Find out anything useful at least? Apparently the mayor decided to impose a curfew while the gala is going on. I say almost offhandedly, a rather stringent one too. Seriously? She blanches. Yup. I snort. Fucker wasn't even trying to hide he is bought, though that's probably a sign of prestige over here now that I think about it. Anything we should worry about? You mean aside from all the corporate bodyguards? Yes, aside from the soulless murder machines. She rolls her eyes. Nothing that stood out to me. I shrug and slowly start getting up. If anyone has plans about crashing the party, they are being real quiet about it. Discussions on threats to the people's safety obviously existed, but none of it clicked as anything more than fear-mongering to me, and any actual discussion on the topics was so heavily censored and controlled it left that particular avenue of research quite dead. Joy, chin up. I pat my coat down from the bit's morning dew sticking to it, because that was an actual thing here apparently. Chances are some corpo will try to make a spectacle out of murdering one of their rivals, so we are still getting a show. Joy, she repeats, sounding not at all joyful. The day passed in a blur of preparation and planning, and just as the sun began to dip once more, I found myself crouched in my own little corner of the penthouse, looming over my oversized toolbox. For once I didn't overthink my own preparation, tying a belt of EMP grenades around my waist and a bandolier of frags over my chest. My old reliable Liberty was joined by a freshly modified and upsized Buria. The pistol had been turned into a genuine hand cannon, and while the power had gotten only a slight boost, the weapon could at least be considered a revolver instead of a breech-loader. I magnetically attached my chainsword to my hip and slung my crusher over my shoulder, the rest of my weapons and tools getting moved over into a smaller and more compact suitcase I would carry on my back. Briefly looking the whole ensemble over, I nodded in satisfaction. I could only hope none of it would be necessary. The armored limo drove up the hillside with nary a rumble, leading us to a grand palatial complex built in the old European style that was to house both the gala and the concert. Donnie the manager tugged at his high-collared neo-kitsch jacket, trying and failing to hide the still raw scars of his last-moment visit to the doctor's K. Kerry. He half-stuttered and quickly cleared his throat. "Are you sure you are ready for tonight?" "Shut it, Donald." The rocker snapped, not even bothering to look at him, and instead eyeing a sealed bottle of whiskey like it owed him money. He was doing much better than 3 days ago, but seeing as he could only go up from there, that wasn't exactly saying much. At least he was eyeing the drink now instead of the gun. The fat manager's eyes flashed with anger, but being a cowardly little shit, he said nothing. While the two were questioning their life choices, the rest of us decided to go over our plans one final time. Layout stays the same as we discussed. I'm direct hustle. Sharp is close circle info gathering and support. Kimigawa is overwatch. Questions? K. Plans for if VIP moves around too much. I sent her a file containing the hall's blueprints. Focus on the main dining hall, reception hall, and concert hall. Find secure route between the three. Concert hall holds priority. K. Got it. Sharp, any questions? S. Of course not. I will charm my way through the crowd and stand ready to help as needed. K. Charm. S. No need for such scathing remarks, my dear. There is enough to go around. The old man's moustache twitched as he sent the message. Good. Got your chips ready? They both sent affirmations. Remember the drone instructions? Kimigawa visibly rolled her eyes, but they both confirmed again. Excellent. 10 minutes ETA. Seeing the duo relaxing, I disconnected from the call. Anything on the net, Logos? Negative. No intrusions excepting corporate security performing routine scanning. They didn't notice you, I hope. Keeping a low profile is unchallenging with so much noise. The Netwatch delegation shows no reaction. Good. Best keep it that way. I have also taken the liberty of snooping through one of the local biolab's databanks. You fucking what? I did my best not to twitch. It was perfectly safe. They were a less than prominent company and had no protections worthy of a net-based life form. And what had you so curious about a biolab? Your disproportionate attention to the feline-based modifications on the server last night. Catgirls are good culture. Now stop avoiding the question. A beat passed. Very well, I merely hungered for understanding. The Night City net space is too volatile for idle observation, and I was secure enough in the knowledge my constant presence was not necessary. So, you just wanted a break? Affirmative. I barely managed not to sigh out loud. Next time just ask me instead of sneaking about. I don't mind you having your own you time. Really? You are in my head. Are you really that surprised? The thoughts concerning me you allow me to observe tend to be contradictory. Welcome to being a person. I mentally huff and quickly add, if you want my honest opinion on something, simply ask me and I will answer. Truly, we are partners, are we not? We are, thank you. Making a mental note to smack myself for letting things get this far, I think a bit louder for the lack of a better word. Just not right now. We've arrived. The limo slowed down as we approached the perimeter, the guard quickly waving us through as the driver eased us into a secluded parking spot. Immediately the three of us fanned out of the car, my two partners looking serious and attentive, while my own face remained hidden behind my visor. Kerry and Donnie stepped out a moment after us, gawking at the stadium-sized palace, surrounded by fountains and artificial streams, despite their experience with similar sights. They shook it off quickly enough, and we fell in around the VIP, completely ignoring the manager as none of us was paid to protect him. Before we reached the halfway point to the entrance, Kimigawa slinked off on her own, her digital signature dimming to near imperceptibility under the effect of one of my chips. Like a monument to everything wrong with the world. I caught Kerry muttering as he stared up into the grand arch above the entrance, before he quickly shook his head and we ascended the marble staircase. We were not the only ones who came early either, as I could easily identify a number of the delegations already mingling in the park. And by mingling I meant a blonde woman in Biotechnica colors was glaring at a grizzled veteran wearing Militech overalls, All the while, the Militech rep's fully plated Dragoon FBC bodyguard was glaring death at the pair of hulking men standing near the biotech rep. They had obviously been heavily biomodded, their bones and musculature coming back as much denser and heavier to my silent scan, alongside a number of beneath-the-skin growths I couldn't even begin to guess at with so little information. Didn't stop me from feeling quite curious about how well they would stand up to a frame as notorious as the Dragoon. Unfortunately, corporate representatives, and doubly so the representatives of the big names, did not get to their positions by being mentally deficient, so the little stare-down died before we even reached the hall's entrance. The Dragoon displays signs of deficient connection. Beware proximity. Got it. I nodded and stepped into the reception hall. There was a good reason the Dragoon was notorious instead of famous. Way too many goddamn sensors for the human brain to reasonably cope with, at least not without considerable medication, and a very finite lifespan, even more notorious exceptions aside, of course. The reception hall of the Zürischen Prunksaal was beyond massive, and beyond shiny, and after the VIP was given a few moments to grab himself a drink, we were greeted by a uniformed valet who at first spoke to us in German but quickly flipped to English once he recognized Kerry. "I beg your pardon, sir. Please follow me and I will show you to your assigned seating for the evening." "Thanks," he muttered without even looking at him, which didn't seem to bother him in the slightest as he led us up a section of stairs that veered off to the side and would end up in the far back of the main hall, placing us with the rest of the entertainment. Or a portion of them anyway. Nice and far away from the rats. Good. A twitch of the hand had Sharp peeling off on his own and joining the rest, while I drew the attention to myself by simply existing. The other artists sponsored by the Corps were understandably rather intimidated by the presence of a looming heavily armed bodyguard walking into their colourful little gathering, and just for a brief moment there was silence. But then Donnie went and opened his mouth, speaking loudly enough to be heard by everyone in the room as he tried to coerce his pissed-off client into playing nice with the supposedly famous names in the room, which naturally caused Kerry to quite loudly tell me to stop anyone from coming anywhere near us, dampening the mood in the room again and making Donnie look like he'd just swallowed a lemon. Before Kerry decided he'd had enough and told the man to go and make sure the concert hall was in good order, finally freeing us of his presence. An hour passed with me deriving considerable amusement from glaring a number of the curious clout-chasing artists into silent submission before the lights in the main hall dimmed and the EEC rep opened up with his sickeningly sanitized speech about global trade, prosperity and cooperation and other such tripe while saying absolutely nothing at all. The man could have probably kept weaving the speech for hours, but he was merciful and settled only on 40 minutes before the whole event turned from meaningless words to some of the most blatantly masturbatory performative generosity the human mind could conceive of. Completely worthless items were auctioned off, whereupon the buyer and the amount of money they threw at it would be announced for all to hear repeatedly. In short, it was a polite dick-measuring contest of who had more money to burn away. Because I was 100% sure none of this was actually going to charity. And I wanted to join this clown show. Guess there is an actual reason for people to go to rat school if they needed to strategize around stupid shit like this. V was probably having the time of her life right now. The corpo. Her eyes were completely and utterly dead as she listened to the speaker announce Biotechnica's 6th multi-million donation for the day, and for a moment she wished for nothing more than to go back in time and kick Smasher in the dick. At least then she wouldn't have to listen to any more of this shit. She gave the cyborg a sideways glance and barely kept her face from twitching as she saw him stare off into nothing, optics dimmed and body completely still. Was he asleep? A loud applause drew her eyes back to the podium, just as the speaker, a Jean-Claude from Brussels, cleared his throat. "The less fortunate will no doubt thank you for your kindness tonight, and I personally thank you for your patience." Cue polite chuckles. "We have prepared a fine selection of entertainment and amenities for the evening. Please enjoy yourselves at your leisure." With polite but half-hearted applause, the man stepped off from his spot. What even was the point of all that? "The boredom is a weapon, Ms. Price." The ever-so-slightly amused voice of Yorinobu Arasaka sent a chill down her spine as she realized she had spoken aloud. A cybernetic snort informed her it wasn't just the ninjas who witnessed the blunder either. Fear not, the reaction is perfectly understandable. The corporate heir assured without looking at her, I personally tuned the fool out over an hour ago. He paused, but you must no doubt be wondering about the real reason behind this grand gathering. Yes, sir, she said quickly, squashing her curiosity about the man's seeming openness with her. Keeping quiet in the presence of an Arasaka family member was the rule, but not speaking when spoken to was an even worse faux pas than speaking unprompted. They are rattled, he says with some mockery. It seems some fresh group of fanatical and radical communists have begun acting against the EEC in the past years, and the Union has so far been unable to put them down on their own. Tonight serves as their first real attempt of gathering support against them. She caught herself, but seeing the expectant look on Mr. Arasaka's face, she went on, are we looking to help them out? No. He shook his head, a light exhale leaving his nose. We are here merely to counterbalance Militech's presence. The Europeans restarting cooperation with them would be unfortunate. Read disastrous. And if we ourselves were to begin cooperating with Europe instead, Militech would take it as a direct challenge. He went on, no doubt resulting in another corporate war. Might actually be fun this time, Smasher grunts. Been a while since I've had a good bloodbath. Well, my honourable father has decided the time for open warfare is not now. The heir stands up and turns to the exit of their private booth. Come, there may yet be something worthwhile to salvage from the evening. They made their way back to the reception hall, followed by the rest of the bodyguard detail, and just as she was about to call the valet and ask about the itinerary, she just barely managed to catch a muttered, "Is that fucking Smasher?" Sadly for whichever idiot drew attention to themselves, Smasher's hearing was far better than her own. Her apathy practically evaporated as she looked at just who had spoken, and saw the world-famous NC rock star Kerry Eurodyne glaring at the massive Fullborg, while another familiar figure was standing behind him, clutching at the handles of his weapons like his life depended on it. Fuck. Michael Margot Sobranov. Shit. Preparing emergency assault protocol. Adam fucking Smasher. He stomped over to the dumbass cheerleader whose boyfriend he painted on the pavement ages ago, making sure to move slowly enough so the meat had enough time to shit itself. But before he could have his fun, he noticed something interesting about the bodyguard he'd almost dismissed. Now there is a model I've never seen. He grinned internally, suddenly speeding up only to stop himself a foot away from striking range as he found a modified Burrier railgun pointed at the biopod in his chest. His mental grin had only widened at the reaction. Finally, some fun. 85. Chapter 85. Getting Smashed. Adam fucking Smasher. With deliberate slowness, he looked away from the other Fullborg and back down at the cheerleader. Who the fuck are you? Eurodyne choked for a moment before glaring back. You know damn well who I am, you mass-murdering piece of shit. He was quickly tugged back by his bodyguard. Step away, the other Borg commanded, but Adam just ignored him. Really? He mocked. Killed some butt buddies of yours, did I? Stop fucking pretending. The cheerleader was sending spittle flying everywhere at this point, filth like you shouldn't be allowed to walk free. Ah, I remember now. That little bitch Silverhand, the meat kept begging for his life while I ripped him apart. He pretended to remember as he leaned back slightly before letting out a dark chuckle. Good times. So fucking easy. The cheerleader's face went red and he reached for his gun. Finally. Smasher snarled and his Sandavistan snapped into action. Let's see if the frame is worth its chrome. The bodyguard went to press the trigger, too slow. His left fist blurred into motion, slapping the toy gun away into tiny pieces, while his right was already blurring towards the bodyguard's face. The other frame's golden eyes twitched with the telltale motion of a Karen being active as he just barely twisted aside, deflecting Adam's strike with too much surface contact like a complete fucking amateur. He blurred the deflected arm back against the newbie, smashing against his retreating limb and pushing the newest source of his boredom away from the cheerleader. But Adam's building disappointment evaporated almost immediately as the scrappy little fucker failed to use the chance to run away like a little bitch, and instead used the momentum to twist on his foot, and move in for a reinforced joint burst lunge. He barely even bothered acknowledging his black eyes, deflecting a cheap netfuckery attack, while his armor bounced off the meat guard's supporting fire, allowing him to focus fully on the cyborg. He laughed as he rushed to meet the fucker, the floor under him ripping and cracking as he reached over to rip one of his arms off. His internal grin only widened when he saw the other Borg's eyes flash with a burst of will, the limb twisting just under his grapple and snaking under his arm, cutting into some of the exposed wiring before he could fully pull back and temporarily crippling the cyberarm. Thermal knives for fingers, he realized in professional disgust. He would have been insulted by the fucking gimmick weapon if it didn't actually catch him off guard, and he quickly brought his other arm forward as the follow-up strike came, the limb twitching as he felt a fucking saw blade bite into the plating before following up with an EMP stream. Another fucking gimmick, he snarled and pushed back, twisting the arm and letting it bite even deeper before throwing it backwards alongside its wielder. Deciding he'd played around long enough, he began positioning himself for a rotational kick to the head, only to cease and step back as he heard an irritated, "Smasher, cease." "Michael Magos Sobronov." "Logos, wait," I said the moment the Arasaka spoke, the entire reception hall going deathly silent. My brain was stuck in the closest thing I had to an adrenaline rush as it kept entering and leaving a semi-zone state every other moment without any help from my Kerenzikov. My optics frantically moving in each and every direction without any input from myself as I tried and failed to bring myself back under some semblance of control. "So this is what fear feels like," Logos muttered digitally as he kept his net assault at the ready but didn't activate it. In the next moment, my eyes landed on Sharp and Kerry, only to find the two being held at Mantis blade point by a pair of Arasaka cyber ninjas. A quick mental ping showed a duo of them already doing the same to Kimigawa in her small nook upstairs. All of that in just 2 fucking seconds. A small part of me was consumed by fear, the much larger one was simply awed. I could almost taste Smasher's frustration despite his skull-like faceplate's inability to emote, his feet seeming to grind the cracked flooring beneath us further, despite the fact he was standing completely and utterly still. "Urodine-san," Yorinobu Arasaka spoke up after a moment. "I trust your attempt on my bodyguard is nothing but an unfortunate misunderstanding. Are you content with ending hostilities here?" Some fucking how the offer of mercy, because that is exactly what this was, surprised me more than the fact I was still actually alive. Kerry went to snap back, but then his eyes found the two of us, and he grunted a short and clipped "Fine." "Good." The corpo offered a small smile in return. It wouldn't do to kill one of my favorite artists over something so minor. Said artist's resulting scowl of disgust only seemed to amuse him for some reason. "Ms. Price," he addressed V, who was standing in front of him and just a bit off to the side. "Anything you can provide us on the guard detail?" My cybernetic heartbeat picked up and my brain hyper-focused on her expression. She kept it completely blank as she answered, "One of Rogue's crack teams. She sends them out when she needs discretion." "Discretion?" Arasaka's eyebrows rose as he looked at me questioningly. Almost mechanically, I droned out a "nothing happened." "Excellent." He nodded and stopped caring that I existed. My eyes found Smasher again, and for whatever reason his own were focused on my weapon. "Where did you get that?" he asks bluntly. "The gimmick store." I deadpan. He lets out a dark chuckle and tilts his head to his boss. "I want one." "I'm sure that can be arranged, Smasher-san," Arasaka says with the slightest touch of exasperation. "Now let us move. We've wasted enough time already." We didn't so much as twitch as the Arasaka bodyguard detail withdrew from us, Smasher giving me a glare that practically screamed, "We'll meet again," as he slowly retreated away. The other corpos seemed content with that, at least for now, but I knew their caution would not last. A small cynical voice in the back of my head told me Kerry was going to be buying a lot of marble in the near future, but I found I didn't really give a single fuck about that right now. "K, holy shit, we are alive." Kimigawa's message came a second later, but Sharp and I paid it no attention, sharing a curt nod between ourselves before I grabbed Kerry by the neck and dragged him in front of me while ignoring all of his panicked sputtering. A flash of the blueprint quickly directed me to a good secluded spot. The toilet will do. We quickly left the reception hall, past a quartet of temporarily blinded droid guards, slinked away into a less used workers' passage, and promptly shoved the toilet doors open, Sharp closing them behind me as I slammed Kerry against the wall. What? What the fuck? He choked out in pain, and before he could get another word out, my still heated clawed fingers clutched the front of his face, drawing small lines of blood on contact. At least the limb had stopped twitching by now. Even deflecting Smasher's blow seemed to rearrange my internals slightly with whatever the fuck he'd done with his limbs. Thank fuck for nanites. But I could piss myself about the recording later. This needed addressing first. I leaned in towards Uridine's face, a low hissing growl leaving my vocalizer. Starting fights is fine, behaving like a wreck is fine, hell even getting us shot is fine as I can fix that. Sharp grunted. But dragging us with you into certain fucking death, I snarled, pushing him further against the wall. You think you're worth our lives? He let out a pained cough and glared at me, still saved us all. From a situation you put us in the first place, you dickless fucking retard, I snapped before leaning in and lowering my voice. Listen to me, Uridine, and listen to me well. The only reason I am not planning on feeding you your own guts when we get back to Night City is the fact I still need Rogue's contacts. He shivers as my voice turns into a whisper. But if you even think of shooting us in the back like that again, I will not kill you. His pained gaze flashes with confusion. Oh no, I say darkly, I will drag you off to my most secure location and commit upon you such atrocities even the fucking corpos will declare me a monster. He pales as I go on, my strained mental state making my voice come out cheerfully deranged. And the best part, I will keep you alive for decades. Sharp says nothing, but I barely catch him exhaling in satisfaction. I ignore the smell of urine under me. Well? He sucks in a deep breath, too terrified to look away. My eyes narrow. It won't happen again. He finally stutters out. See to it that it fucking doesn't. I hiss and shove him back against the wall one final time before letting him slide down like a puppet with its strings cut. My drill mechadendrite slithers out from below my weapon case, injecting him with a dose of stimulants while I pull out a pack of wet wipes and drop them on his face. Clean yourself up. You look pathetic. I wave for Sharp to follow me, and we step out of the toilet room, taking positions on the sides of the entrance. We should have waited to leave the hall before grabbing him, Sharp says after a moment, his voice under careful control. Ms. Rogue might protest our visible manhandling of the VIP. The job is to get him back alive. I grunt, and I'm sorely tempted to stop interpreting the spirit of that wording. I share your disappointment. Sharp nods, but you are still a young man. Don't let... My raised hand stops him. Don't, not right now. He closes his eyes and nods, leaning back against the wall. Very well. K, are you two fuckers going to finally answer me? M, sorry, everything is fine. K, where even are you? I've been running around the maintenance room like an idiot trying to find you. I flick her the location. S, we were merely informing the VIP of new security standards. K, did you rip his balls off? M, unfortunately not. K, shame. K, we still on? M, depends on the VIP repositioned to the concert hall for now. K, got it, more waiting. Good thing I brought my energy drinks. I must admit, a can would be wonderful right now. Sharp chuckles lightly. Doubt the high society types have those on offer. I shake my head. You'd be surprised. He says, but doesn't elaborate. A few minutes pass as I observe Kerry bringing himself back into a semblance of order through the wall. Finally, he pushes the door open with what he must think is a confident gait, but immediately flinches as my eyes find him and lowers his head, passing us by without a word. At least he was walking in the right direction. Soon we reached the artist section of the concert room and music was already blasting outside. Kerry stopped in front of the door between it and the service hallway we were using. He looked tempted to look back, but instead squared his jaw, brought something out of his pocket, and took a long snort. Of fucking course. I wasn't even surprised anymore. Letting out a sharp exhale, the musician briefly shuddered and then confidently shoved his way inside, glaring his waiting manager's questioning look into submission. "Where is my stuff, Donny?" "This way," the fat man quickly said. The following hour passed at a crawl as Sharp and I did our best to scare any of the others from coming too close, while Kerry seemed to be in a world of his own, still not looking in our direction even once. Tempted as I was to wander off, send a thank you message to V for covering for me, or do anything other than be in the glittered-out little shit-stain's presence, I remained standing just a step back away from him at all times. Logos had completely retreated to his persona core at this point, and I could feel him frantically going through the recording of everything that happened in the fight, only to come back with answers each more terrifying than the last. Needless to say, Smasher was fucking playing with me, and I was not sure what to think about that. Even quick hacking, my usual tiebreaker, simply bounced off his defenses without even heating his black ice. Ultimately, I decided I was just happy to still be alive. There was that one old adage about fearing old men in professions where men die young, and Smasher was already an old man over half a century ago. The chrome fiend could have cracked me like a ripe melon, and the only reason he didn't was his owner's whim. I looked down on my clutched hand, now mostly repaired, even if imperfectly. "Next time I'll be ready." Finally the time came, and the VIP slowly stood up, momentarily looking like he wanted to speak up, before shaking his head and walking up the staircase leading to the stage. Sharp and I shared another nod, Kimigawa reconfirming she had a perfect view of the entire room. The moment Uridine walked out on the stage, the entire hall went wild, the younger corpos who managed to wriggle their way into an invitation looking genuinely enthusiastic about their presence here from my hidden perch behind the stage. For a brief moment, I caught Kerry's eyes turning completely dead, before they disappeared, and he grinned at his audience, rising his guitar to a roaring cheer. Got chrome in my bloodstream. The familiar solo segment of his version of Chipping In started, and I found myself shaking my head at the fact I was ever a fan of this. Got a hardwired metal soul. Ignoring the tiny part of me that sympathized with the rocker, I tuned the music out and began doing my job properly, scanning everything in sight and then on the net, only to pause as I saw a flicker of something disappear behind a stacked data wall in the relative distance. Mentally frowning, I decided I wasn't going to chance a shitty day turning even shittier, and immediately informed my two teammates to be on high alert. 20 tense minutes passed, and I saw another flicker, and the moment I saw it explode through the palatial hall's defenses, I lunged at Kerry, appearing in front of him just as he finished his latest encore. Just in time to catch a salvo of SMG rounds on my chest and shoulder armor, and to see the droid guard detail spread out to across the hall begin mercilessly gunning down the screaming audience, their previously soft blue optics replaced with a crackling, blaring red. Of fucking course, I cursed to myself and raised my gun. 86, Chapter 86, The Attack. Michael Margos Sobronov. The 6 droids closest to me burst into multiple pieces as I immediately gunned them down, a digital attack following right after the shells, but doing absolutely nothing as my demons seemed to simply bounce off. It was like whatever was hacking them was constantly reinforcing itself, and I quickly concluded I'd need a full minute just to shut down one droid down. Discarding the net for now, I made sure to conserve my ammo as I began moving back to a less open space, pushing Uridine along with a growled "move," while I was constantly peppered with small arms fire, and lo and behold, the man did so without protest. A few steps behind us, Sharp was already taking point, rushing into the back rooms and gunning down a squad of haywire droids before they could try and surround us, barking clipped orders to the other musicians to keep away and shoving or outright pistol whipping those who were too slow to listen. "We need to find cover. This place is too open," I said, still glaring at the others to keep them from approaching. "Anything we need to grab first?" "Just my gun," Kerry said quickly and began walking to his private preparation room. "We can leave everything else." "Good," I nodded and followed. "Get moving." And as he shoved the door open, I very nearly blew a man's head off as Donny, the manager, practically speed crawled out of the room. "My God, Kerry!" he cried as he grabbed the disgusted musician's leg. "What is going on? Are we safe?" But he didn't get the chance to find his answer, as he found my crusher pointed at his face. "Step away." He gulped as his eyes widened in realization, and he looked back up to his employer. You wouldn't." But Kerry had already walked into the room and grabbed his revolver, stepping out with a wild look in his eyes and another trail of glitter running down his nose. "Done?" I asked, and didn't wait for an answer as I nodded and turned to the exit. "Come, we've wasted enough time." Donnie and the other musicians tried following after us, but a glare from me had them keeping a safe distance away. For a moment I considered forcing them to stay, but quickly shook the idea off. They can have their chance at safety so long as they don't become an obstacle. The chaos outside only seemed to grow as we began moving, and a ping quickly informed me that except for a few bodyguards managing to fight back, most of the audience was completely helpless against the automatons and were being mercilessly gunned down. I took the realization most of them were teens or young adults not actually involved in the running of the core and shoved it into the deepest recesses of my mind. No time for such distractions. Try to save everyone, and you save no one. I growled to myself and took point again, clearing our way for a regroup with Kimigawa at a pre-designated retreat point. Logos, net status. Overwhelming pressure from multiple points across the city detected. Source: multiple server farms emanating identical signal. Attack directive appears fully aimed at the Prunksal. All Zurich security droids affected. Motive unclear. Goal: annihilation. So we know they aren't just going berserk, I muttered as we burst into the service tunnel and were met by a squad of about a dozen droids. What joy! Time seemed to slow down again as I began gunning the scrap heaps down, but before I could get all of them on my own, the familiar report of a sniper rifle rang out across the passage, ripping the rest apart from behind. Sharp looked the carcasses over briefly and voiced, "Clear. Clear." Came back from one of the side passages about 50 feet in front of us, and Kimigawa stepped out with a haggard look on her face. A scan informed me she had already spent the suppression drone I'd given her, likely to keep any pursuers away. Drone protections appear secure against hostile signal. Hostile signal deemed pre-prepared and exclusively targeted at Swiss Security Force OS specifications. Thank fuck. I felt a flash of relief at that, and we quickly made our way to a more defensible position away from the main venues, a small dining hall with only 2 approaches a level above us. I felt a flash of irritation as the 24 or so musicians and a few of their managers shuffled in after us. But I was done wasting brain power on them, and instead proceeded to inform the rest of the team and the VIP about what I knew through a secure channel. "Jesus Christ," Uridine hissed uselessly, voice barely above the constant gunfire echoing through the walls. "We can't leave through the main entrance." Sharp declared, "If whoever or whatever is doing this has control over the city's security force, as you say, we will be overwhelmed in seconds." "We could always just bunker up." Kimigawa says, "Wait this whole thing out." That is supposing the droids are incapable of overwhelming the entire complex before reinforcements arrive, or that our attackers don't have another surprise prepared. Sharp shakes his head, and that strikes me as nothing more than wishful thinking. "And we don't have the kind of ammo needed for a holdout," I reminded grimly. "We need a better solution." Before we could go on, my ping detected another clump of droids marching up to our position. I flicked a mental command, and my artifact slipped out from behind me, opening the large weapon case on my back and letting a quartet of squat boxy devices drop from within. A split second later, Logos sent me confirmation of his connection, and the 4 boxes sprouted thin yet powerful limbs before skittering over at the approaching enemy, soon followed by short bursts of light machine gun fire. "That should buy us a few minutes at best," I informed while still observing the battle, if it could even be called that. The Swiss droids were solidly designed, but my Militor drones were comparatively tiny while carrying a much heavier armament, and unlike their current opponents, their aim was guided directly by Logos instead of a simple algorithm. Their munition storage may be limited, but they were more than capable of doing considerable damage before running out and throwing themselves into a final suicide charge. "We need to break out," Sharp declared after a few moments of thought. "The woods to the southwest should give us the cover to avoid most of the fighting." "And then what?" Kimigawa asked. "Then we make for the AV. Whether we survive this or not doesn't matter if we don't get out." The Swiss and the EEC will look for anyone they can get away with blaming for this mess, and I don't need to remind you about how important we are in their eyes. Of course. Kerry laughs to himself. Why wouldn't they blame us for their mess? It won't matter if we are half a world away, Sharp repeats firmly, and if we want to get there, we need to start moving yesterday. And what if the AV fucked off already? Kerry asks. Then we die. Sharp's responding smile was cold as ice. And you pray your lawyer is the orator of the century. The rock star huffed, eyes dilating under the effect of whatever mess he'd huffed into his veins. Well, when you put it like that, we really should try and getting out, right now. The old man hums dismissively and prepares to move. But then Kerry decides to speak up again. What about them? He asks, pointing at the huddled non-combatants and the pleading eyes of his manager. The three of us share a quick look, and I hold back a sigh. They follow. If they fall behind, they get left behind. Optimal route calculated. Logos pings me a moment later, displaying a route leading to one of the interior gardens with a sizable glass covering we could punch through without getting too overwhelmed in our escape. Excellent. I felt my calm returning as we finally had a plan of action, and the moment we did, we were already moving again, passing by the small scrapyard left behind by the bodies of the hacked droids and what was left of my drones as we did. Unwilling to let the meat behind us freeload, I flicked my cyberdeck on and was relieved to find that whatever locks were placed on the droids' guns were not being loop-hacked like their wielders. I quickly unlocked the submachine guns and informed the cowards of this fact. Sharp made a disapproving noise but didn't comment as our main group pushed on, leaving the scrambling civvies even further behind us as we made for our exit point. We couldn't relax yet, though, as we were met with multiple clusters of droids trying to cut us off with coordination that would have been terrifying, if not for the fact we appeared to be tertiary targets at best. My constant observation of the local net space easily confirmed this, as I could see far larger groups gunning down the few corporate soldiers trying to hold the front and advancing deeper into the secure rooms of the complex, while we were faced only with small groups of the regular grunt models which we could gun down with relative ease. This didn't stop them from draining our ammunition supplies in mere minutes of fighting, though, and soon I was completely out of shotgun shells, relying on my liberty as much as my chains word, while Sharp was hefting my copperhead and Kimigawa had begun actively salvaging from their corpses. And the closer we came to the garden section, the louder the sounds of combat became, the pitter-patter of small arms fire soon joined with the groans of metal and explosive detonations. A loud boom went off as we burst through a side entrance and into the sight of the Militech detachment fighting off a number of droids from atop the stairway gallery that led to the exit downstairs. The rep's damaged Dragoon bodyguard twitched in our direction before another squad of more bulky combat droids distracted him and forced him to keep gunning them down with his heavy machine gun, the missile rack on his left shoulder having long since been expended on getting here. We didn't have time to negotiate with the suspicious NUSA rep, or the few Corpo soldiers still sticking around him as we rushed to join the fighting, and our added concentration of fire soon paid off as the minor tidal wave of security droids were pushed back, buying us a couple of minutes before the next closest cluster could reach us. Kimigawa sighed as the gunfire turned distant again, and the few armed civvies that joined us, including Donnie, he might be a slime but he was still from NC, slumped against the floor, their pilfered guns dropping next to them. The rest of us knew better than to relax yet as we found ourselves staring down the half a dozen or so Militech goons and their walking tank. Sharp flicked me a hand signal to let him talk, and I did so, staying still and giving him the go-ahead to approach the Corpo group while I made sure to keep the VIP completely covered with my body. Pardon the interruption, gentlemen. Sharp greeted the group with his usual personable smile, hands slightly raised while he held his gun by the handguard, and approached slowly and carefully. I understand the situation we find ourselves in is rather stressful. The Militech rep frowned but quickly grunted. You know what the hell is going on? I would be delighted to share all we've gathered so far, Sharp assures, just as soon as we help each other get out of this place. Dragoon signal scrambling. Logos warned suddenly, and seeing the Fullborg growing increasingly twitchy by the moment, I felt my panic spike and my Kerenzikov flicked into full power. My hand was already moving before the Psycho Dragoon even began reacting to Sharp's approach, and I'd already unloaded an entire magazine into his gun by the time he started actually moving. Unfortunately, the stopping power of the Buria I was used to was nowhere to be found with my sidearm, and all I'd managed to do in that split second was throw the mindless animal's aim off slightly before he finished raising his weapon and turned most of Sharp's body into pink mist. I found myself staring at the misty cloud of gore in slow motion, my thoughts a confused blur as reality slowly but inevitably caught up with my mind, and I realized just what had happened. In the corner of my eye, I caught a flash of panic in the Militech rep's eyes, but that was as long as I cared to pay attention to him. My powered joints coiled as I found I'd already pointed my chainsword forward, and everything except the Dragoon became an irrelevant blur as I launched myself forward. With some returned clarity, he managed a defensive step backwards, warding off my overhead slash with a backhand that quickly turned into a stumble as I forced my legs to activate again, shoulder-checking the metal behemoth with enough brute force to send him momentarily stumbling backwards. And in the accelerated perception of the Kerenzikov, a moment was all I'd need. Logos's entire processing power slammed into his OS, smashing through his self-ice in an instant, and just in time for my chainsword to whip out in a blurry sideways slash, the roar of the teeth and engine disappearing behind a loud clang and screech of metal as my weapon smashed into the bastard's battered neck guard, easily biting trough the metal and very nearly severing the head before I was forced to disengage by a wild, panicked slam. But the damage was already done, rendered defenseless by Logos as he was. The electromagnetic stream I'd shoved into his internals was not something that could be repaired without a full workshop or a nanoforge. My perception of time returned to normal as I felt my artifacts reach into my weapon case and deposit my newest weapon into my hands. "Wait," the Militech rep shouted as he realized what was happening. I didn't. The modified heavy Nekomata felt weighty even in my arms as I pointed directly at the chest-held biopod of the Dragoon, completely ignoring the panicked snap fire of the Militech goons trying to save their walking tank. They could do nothing as the weapon loudly charged, and even less as it deposited its tungsten shell payload into the basement 2 floors below us. For a long moment, utter silence reigned in the ruined multi-level garden. And then the Militech rat exploded. "You idiot, do you have any idea what you've done?" "Killed a cyberpsycho," I responded coldly without bothering to look at him. "You've just cost Militech millions, you Night City scum." He spat despite his clear fear, terrorist attack or not, you aren't getting away with this. So they believe it is a terror attack. I noted in my private mind, at least it isn't a rogue AI. Very well. I nodded, finally looking at him. My response seemed to stump him as his words caught in his throat. That confusion disappeared rather quickly as my mechadendrite slithered out from behind me, and my chainsword began emitting a low purr once again. I blinked as an unfamiliar shot rang out across the garden and stepped away from the pile of gore, taking in a deep breath of the fresh Swiss air as I turned back to the surviving members of my group. Most of them were looking at me with nothing but pure horror in their eyes, while Kerry Uridine was slowly lowering his revolver from where he'd just shot the final Militech rat, trying to run away while I was dealing with his buddies. I gave the drugged-out rock star a clipped nod and said, "More droids incoming." Kimigawa looked up from Sharp's mangled remains, a pair of glinting dog tags held in her hand, and quickly got up. That seemed to shake the rest of them from their stunned state, and soon they were rushing down the stairwell and towards the ruined glass wall that would lead us into the nearby artificial woodland, and hopefully to safety. Shouldering my Nekomata, I picked my copperhead up from near Sharp's corpse and marched out. We were not home free yet. 87. Chapter 87. Getting Out of Dodge Due. Yumiko Kimigawa. "How bad is it?" she asked as she and Magos looked out from their hidden perch in the artificial woods. The blood-covered cyborg gave the burning district of Zurich closest to them another deliberate once-over before twitching his shoulders in something approaching a shrug. "Not as bad as it could be. Most of the droids are just passing by, but they are still gunning down anyone who gets in their way. Guessing the fire is mostly coming from the chaotic traffic collapse." "What about the curfew?" He shot her a sideways glance. That only applies to the actual citizens, and this part of the city is meant for us and the rats. Think luring them out to block the way through was planned. That would be autistic, he notes dryly, so probably. Or it was just an attack of opportunity. Good thing we are going around the entire shitstorm. Yeah, she sighed, making sure not to let her thoughts trail back to their exit some 10 minutes back. Shame we won't be able to grab more ammo, though. If you want to wade through that to get back to the penthouse, be my guest. He points vaguely in the direction of the hotel they were staying at, just in time for a series of explosions to go off and bring a smaller building down. I will be kicking the civvies into gear, they've rested enough. The other survivors looked like death warmed over behind them, both physically and emotionally drained, save for their VIP, who was instead high as a kite. They had all begged for a bit of rest once they finally made it out, and it was granted if for no other reason than for the group to reorient itself. They had wasted enough time already. Come on, Uridine, get your ass up. Margot's called. She felt a slight chill at the constant refusal to acknowledge the rest, but knew the implied threat of being left behind was what was keeping them in line. At least she wasn't the one who had to do it. All right. No need to be so rough, big guy. The rocker boy slurred and rolled onto his feet, taking another sniff of the good stuff as he did. I'm up. The worst part was, he was genuinely more manageable like this. Get moving, or I'll start dragging you. Margot's ordered. I want to be out of this place before whoever did this decides to cut out any potential escape just to spite me. A flash of clarity returned to the singer as he shivered. Just my fucking luck. The insurgents. While the city outside was growing increasingly chaotic, a man wearing special operations fatigues with every single one of his features completely concealed was walking, or more accurately strolling, through an unmapped service tunnel of the Zurichen Prunksaal. A low, relaxed hum of La Marseillaise leaving his throat despite the noise of open battle surrounding him. Reaching a point on the tunnel wall, he nodded and began to pace, until a notification appeared in his sole cybernetic eye, and a small grin split his face. He leaned over as he reached a barely visible grate and slowly removed it, crawling into the vent and then into the secure bunker the EEC leaders had retreated into the moment the attack had begun. He could already hear them shouting over each other, throwing accusations at themselves, then at their guests, and then at whoever else came to mind that could have hacked a couple of robots. Not that anyone shackled by the core could ever reach Schmetterling's level. That girl makes art, not hacks. He chuckled to himself as he crawled deeper into the secure location. The argument inside the bunker had just turned heated when he reached his destination, and while their biomodded bodyguards were distracted by their bosses, looking like they wanted to rip into each other with their bare hands, he soundlessly pushed the grate in front of him, slipping into the room without a trace. And there they were, the CEOs of Europe's greatest corporations, gathered to plan a counter to their deserved fate. A year of preparation, just for this moment. His left hand whipped out, and the two most dangerous bodyguards died in seconds to neurotoxin-laced knives stuck in their throats, the rest losing their lives at the same time as he burst their brains with his silenced pistol. The pathetic, soulless hedonists that commanded the suffering of his people had barely even realized what was happening by now, and he was tempted to give them just a bit more time to truly understand what was coming, but the mission came first. He mentally checked his mag and did righteous work. The head of Biotechnica, disguised as her cousin, lost her head, deux. The EBM's director fell over, clutching at his heart, trois. IEC 4, Netwatch 5. And finally Eurobank. He double-tapped the banker fuck just in case. The instant his mag clicked empty, he slinked back into the grate he came through, covering his exit just as the security detail burst into the room to find some of the most expensive corpses in the entire world, splayed out in silent agony, as if slain by a ghost. The almost childish grin on his face refused to leave him no matter what he did or thought as he made his way back to the unmapped tunnel and only then flicked his communicator on. Central, this is Lafayette. All targets eliminated. Excellent work, operative. The commander's smile was audible through the call. Secondary targets. Only the big names got the hiding spot, mon cher. Like we expected. Unfortunate but understandable. The commander merely filed the information away. And Arasaka and Militek, did they get out like we planned? The very idea of letting the faces of evil flee unmolested disgusted him. Schmetterling piped in, voice still kept in a blur despite their many years of work together. Arasakas are making their way to the airport. Militek got caught up with some neutrals and kicked it. Shit, Commander cursed. We will need to make sure this doesn't give the Americans any ideas. Just make sure to let the Arasakas through and then exfil. We have a celebration to prepare. Central out. Lafayette's face was threatening to split in half as he learned the fate of the Americans, but he waited until the commander disconnected before speaking up. Schmetterling, my beautiful butterfly, are you thinking what I'm thinking? Already sent half the city after them. Oh, how I love the way you think. He laughed before his face twisted into an expression of hateful fury. Good, let none of the filth escape. Sorry, Commander, but some meals are just too good to pass on. Lafayette thought happily as he lit up a cigar, took a drag, and began humming again, passing by a patrolling squad of hacked droids as he left exactly as he arrived, without a trace. The Corpo. Interference signal breached. The most net capable of the cyber ninjas spoke up. Company forces will be here to retrieve you soon. Arasaka-sama. Don't bother, they won't survive transit. Smasher interrupted from atop his pile of wrecked droids, and all of them turned to see him pointing at a swarm of air drones, slowly changing direction to face them. And they seemed so happy to ignore us before. Valerie sighed to herself. The same cyber ninja quickly shoved the corporate heir, who was just about to exit for some fresh air, back into the car and shut him inside. The driver giving them worried looks, but still keeping ready to blast off if the situation demanded it. They had almost reached the airport when they were stopped by a massive roadblock, made up of other cars and crashed AVs. And it was decided they'd try reaching the remaining company detachment before they tried pushing through the blockade. Seemed like they poked something they really shouldn't have. Valerie and the ninjas began gunning down the air drones with no real issue, and she did her best to ignore the almost pouty posture of Adam Smasher, who didn't even bother shooting drones as he most probably found them too boring for the effort. She regretted the thought as soon as it came, because a second later she saw the Netrunner ninja tense before a massive fuck-off security mech shoved its way through a nearby alley, its hacked police siren blaring loudly enough to disorient anyone who had yet to cyberize their ears. But before it could so much as point its set of machine guns at them, Smasher was already moving. Now that's what I fucking want, he roared as his massive frame turned into a blur, and after what felt like a single moment, a loud clang rang out across the street. Smasher reappearing next to the mech's heavy leg, or what was left of it. Did he just punch a fucking hole through a mech? Driver meet. Smasher's voice cut through the noise. Push through the blockade. The rest of you wastes of space blow him a way through. The netfuckers decided to send us a present. As if to punctuate the statement, another pair of mechs appeared on the edges of the street, only to be met with another battle cry as they were quite literally smashed into pieces. V shook her oar away and rushed to help the others clear the way forward. A few burns were not worth staying for whatever clusterfuck was gunning for them. The explosions behind them intensified alongside the cybernetic laughter, and without a word between them, all of the Arasaka personnel agreed to push through just a bit harder. Which is just about when Valerie heard the sound of a missile going off, followed almost immediately by that of it detonating against a metal surface right behind her. Michael Mago Sobranov, commandeering a truck once we'd reached a less explosive part of the city, was as easy as using an outdated breach protocol, and as soon as the runts managed to drag themselves into the rear, we were driving through the almost eerily empty streets and making good time towards the airport. I could still detect the locals huddled in their homes around us, but they seemed to have gotten the memo that they weren't the targets tonight and wisely decided to just sit the whole thing out. Doubt Swiss civvies even had iron on them, so it wasn't like they had the option to do anything else either. Logos kept me up to date with the state of affairs around us as Kimigawa drove, and the movement pattern shift of the droids was obvious. The attackers were finished with whatever they were doing at the State Hall, and now they were moving to make sure no one of note escaped them. Minutes of tense waiting later, I reached for the final Milita drone in my possession, the one that went unused by Sharp, and placed it in front of the truck's windshield, letting it skitter above us and set itself up as a turret. Kimigawa and I shared a quick look and a nod, and I grabbed my groundhog rocket launcher, leaning out of the truck window just as she rounded the final bend in the road, and we came upon the sight of a small army of droids trying and failing to push through a comparatively tiny group of Arasaka goons dug in at the airport's entrance. Well, they were putting up a respectable fight, and I even saw V gunning down small clumps of droids before ducking back into cover to reload her Niue. But what was really keeping the tide back was a familiar black blur. The armor-stripped dragoon frame of Adam Smasher was like a shadow bouncing between droid squads, leaving behind only chunks and scrap as he roared out taunts and challenges. Fucker is having the time of his life. I clicked my tongue and moved my aim away from him. Logos? Optimal strike calculated. An outline of the nearby building appeared in my optical overlay, and I immediately aimed for the weak spot. The quartet of rockets leaving the boxy launcher one after the other and smashing into the already damaged foundation. I didn't bother watching as the building toppled over and crushed every single robot beneath it, blocking the approach from all but the aerial units, which the Saka goons were more than enough to deal with. Part of me was hopeful this would be enough to buy passage, but I wasn't going to chance this shit again, and immediately reached for my Nekomata, letting it charge up as the truck slowed to a halt and Kimigawa moved to the back just in case. Weapon still pointed at Smasher's back, I mentally nudged Logos. Demon compilation completed. Ping.exe uploaded. Breach protocol.exe uploaded. Breach protocol.exe. Successful. Decommission yourself.exe uploading. With a pulse of signal that sent a buzz through my brain, all of the remaining droids in front of the airport entrance stopped in their tracks. Their weapons suddenly pointed at the CPU core in their heads as they all pulled the trigger as one. Then, and only then, did I send V a call. She refused to pick up, and I had Logos hack her overlay so she'd look at me. What the fuck? She visibly twitched under her cover, drawing the eyes of her fellow rats. We need to get into the airport. Can you keep your chooms from going too trigger-happy? Before I could get my answer, I felt another powerful signal come into range and quickly looked aside to see something smash its way through a distant building, and reacted faster than I thought. The boxy security mech fell over backwards as its main cassis was smashed open by my Nekomata shell. Hearing no further response from V, I wasted no time in charging up the next shot. Smasher's face practically twitched around to face whoever had just stolen his fun, and I could almost taste the madman's eagerness to beat the fuck out of me again, and properly this time. But I wasn't going to give up that easily. He couldn't resist an AI indefinitely, and he couldn't move fast enough to dodge a small rail cannon, no matter how experienced he was. The two of us glared at each other, myself in all honesty, scared shitless, and the living legend no doubt eager to see what I'd do before he turned me into fine metal paste. But he'd have to wait as the moment was broken up by V, leaving cover with raised hands. Friendlies, Smasher, friendlies. What the fuck are you talking about, half-meat? Somehow he managed to scowl despite lacking an actual face. Yorinobu-sama said let them through. Impressively, she didn't back away despite all of his attention landing on her. The FBC is a ripper. He looked back at me and then actually looked me over before growling out a slightly more intrigued, "You do custom work?" "Something like that," I retorted irritably and looked back at V. "I can look anyone you want over, but you are helping us get out of here and we are keeping the weapons. Non-negotiable." Her apologetic look at having to spill some of my secrets turned into a wince and then into irritation as she pressed just under her ear again, and after some 15 seconds, she nodded. "Arasaka-sama agrees. You can come through." Thankfully, by this point, Uridine was too out of it to start any shit with Smasher again, and the thoroughly battered Arasaka goons were surprisingly eager to let us through, which only served to grow my suspicion, especially once Smasher started walking next to me without trying to get a rise out of me. My ramping paranoia lasted me until we reached the launch pad, where their netrunner was trying to get the exact AV me and my team arrived in opened up. and a certain corporate air was leaned up against one of its walls and surrounded by a pair of cyber ninjas who were desperately trying and miserably failing to close up the two bleeding stumps that used to be his lower legs. I can work with this. I decided and quickly had Logos open the AV, startling the living daylight out of the ninja who was trying to hack his way in before approaching the downed Arasaka with my bioscanner active. Well, they slowed the bleeding at least. I decided, guessing their medical expert probably bit it in the initial fighting. Seeing the rest of my group approach, I addressed the cyber ninjas. Get him inside and get us in the air. Fixing this will take some time. Bafflingly enough, giving them orders did not earn me an immediate knife to the neck, and within minutes we were blasting off into the Swiss sky. 88, Chapter 88, Homeward Bound. Michael Magos Sobronov. The AV shook violently as I got to work, easily ignoring the increasingly delirious Yorinobu Arasaka's curses as the meds began kicking in and rapidly knocked him out. He was lucky he didn't end up concussed, or else this entire process would have been a lot more awkward for him. The terrorists grew increasingly persistent as I worked, at first drawing more droids to shoot our ascending craft, and then following up with suicide crashes with flying police drones. Unfortunately for them, the AV we were in was a luxury model, and so came with both armoring and turrets that quickly took care of such attempts. He is stable now, I announced after 4 minutes of work, my hands not having shaken once. Make sure to keep him hydrated and don't move him around too much. Hi. One of the ninjas inclined her head. What happened to your medic? I asked, instinctively turning to V. The tired counter-intel agent rubbed her closed eyes, but before she could answer, the looming butcher in the room spoke up in a deep and unmistakably amused rumble. First one they went after, when they realized they couldn't get the kid. Been a while since the meat was this competent. Many members of the guard detail bristled in outrage, whether due to the disrespect aimed at the patient or the seeming lack of care. I frankly did not bother guessing. Well, so long as you are having fun, I guess. I deadpanned and got an agreeable huff for my trouble, my tension deflating despite damn well knowing better. Where are we headed now? V's eyes flashed as she read something, and after a moment of consideration on her face, she answered, "The Ligurian Sea. We need to get to international waters before the EEC starts throwing blame around." I doubt whatever happened is enough for them to start shit with Arasaka, I noted. She held her immediate response back and just said, "Better safe than sorry." Best if I don't know. Got it. I decided, true enough. Where do we go next? Quick stop at Morocco for resupply and then straight back to North Carolina. She says, the less time we spend outside of friendly territory, the bet. Digital assault detected. The Arasaka ninja, currently jacked into the nearby wallport, went to open his mouth, but all he managed was a silent scream before his eyes quite literally burned out of his head and he fell over like a stringless puppet. I was already moving before the man finished hitting the floor, ripping him out of the mainframe before jacking in myself. I was beyond done with these gonks, and I'd burn as many of them alive as I'd need to drive the point. The butterfly. She felt her frustration dip briefly as she ripped through the sole Arasaka goon guarding the retreating AV's net space, only for it to return tenfold as the entire mainframe glitched and flickered. Her previously overwhelming attack stopping in its tracks before it was flung back faster than she could even begin to react. She had to abandon her furious second attempt as mere seconds after the other netrunner connected, she was discovered and targeted by a small sea of demons she couldn't even begin to identify. It wasn't enough to bring her down or even get close to it, but with each passing second, the AV got further and further away, weakening her connection while her opponent would remain unbothered. You aren't getting away that easily. She grit her teeth, hesitating only momentarily before making the choice. Pulling at the central police station server bank under her control, she ripped the constant command protocol upload from thousands of droids. Uncaring for the fact they'd go berserk with the sudden lack of directive and redirecting the server's considerable processing power into bringing the damned AV down. For a brief moment, her jury-rigged assault broke through the lines of odd humanoid demons, reaching the AV's engine controls and sending a thrill of triumph through her mind. Before something she couldn't even begin to identify shifted on the net, and the constant backdrop of the black wall became far less distant, the sudden mental pressure of the AI wall distracting her long enough that when she turned back, all she saw from the previously open and vulnerable net space was an impenetrable data fortress sprung up from seemingly nowhere. And in front of that fortress hovered an unfamiliar icon, a faceless red-robed cyborg with glaring red eyes that felt deliberately unnerving, accompanied by a comparatively tiny metal hound whom he was currently lightly scratching between the ears. Knowing she'd already missed her shot, Schmetterling sighed and stopped her assault, materializing her own butterfly-themed icon near the other netrunner. Might as well try to gather what information she could. "You are the neutral that took down Militech." She sent, "Why protect Arasaka?" The cowled figure somehow managed to convey looking at her like she was the stupidest person in the world, despite not moving or shifting whatsoever. "Because you just tried crashing us, you gonk." "Gonk, Night City slang." She caught quickly. "A mercenary then?" "Yes." The other netrunner confirmed uncaringly. "And one you caught up in your bullshit." Her response was just as uncaring. "It was more than worth the sacrifice. I'm sure believing that makes it easier for you to sleep at night." How quaint. She typed out, "I've not been moralized at by a corpo dog before." The odd demon near the Merc netrunner let out a rather lifelike bark at that, but she ignored it. "And I've just about had it listening to a random zealot prattle. Are you done with your pathetic attempts at taking us down, or should we keep posturing? Your little probes are cute, but let's be real, this is a waste of both of our times." Each word served to fuel her irritation more, and she regretted her message the moment she sent it. "You're just lucky I'm tired." The complete lack of retort, accompanied by a blank stare, was worse than any response he could have given her. "Whatever, run away with your tail between your legs," she typed out furiously, and then rather impulsively added, "And if you ever get tired of selling yourself for corporate scraps, seek us out." The mercenary almost seemed confused for a moment before his relaxed stare shifted into a glare. "Die in a fire, Eurocuck." As he spoke, the same odd shift in the net from before happened again, and Schmetterling finally fully looked at the oddly lifelike dog daemon. Its far too intelligent eyes met hers, and it barked. She disconnected immediately, feeling a flash of heat in the back of her neck as the lower half of her face began to twitch in pain. And her left eye refused to close, no matter how much she tried to make it happen. For a moment she dared hope that would be it. But then the emergency disconnect feedback caught up to her, and she was left curled and screaming, whatever victory she might have felt completely forgotten, as all she knew was pain. Michael Magos Sobranov. Hope the bitch takes her time burning alive, I thought as I disconnected. Logos doesn't wait a second in ruining the fantasy. Unlikely, the scale of attack and the success implies advanced equipment and support infrastructure. "I know," I mutter and look the repurposed rec room over. Smasher and the Arasaka were gone, alongside 4 out of 7 of the cyber ninjas, while everyone else remained here. "Anything happen while I was jacked in?" I spoke up. Kimigawa blinks, only now realizing I was back. "The shakes stopped a few minutes back. You got the bastards." "As much as I could on the defensive," I said, knowing it wasn't what she wanted to hear. Her face scrunched up, but I knew she wasn't about to start blaming me and was just still stuck processing. For all her complaining, she and Sharp had gone on dozens of missions together, and she had definitely gotten used to his constant presence. No matter how much she'd claim otherwise, he was a close friend, and then he died just like that. I know I'd already be spiraling if I was in her place. But the sad truth was that despite having considerable professional respect for Sharp and feeling some responsibility for my own failings in his death, we were simply not that close. And so I decided to do what I can and stood up, patted her shoulder, and tossed the passed-out Uridine over my own. "Let's get him nice and locked into his room so you can get some rest, hmm?" Kimigawa briefly looked like she wanted to protest, but then slowly nodded and muttered a, "Thanks." I waved an equally tired V.A. later. As we left, and I spent the next 15 or so minutes making sure that Kerry didn't accidentally OD while he was trying to escape the reality of the situation through the magic of premium drugs, and then another 15 reassuring the small group of artists and Fat Manager we rescued that they were, probably, going to be let go whenever we got to our destination. Their unease naturally came from the fact they'd been herded into a separate room and told to sit and wait by a pair of shot-up cyber ninjas. Having earned no freedom of movement privileges by way of convenient skill sets like we had. Even then, the Arasaka goons were following my every move as I stepped out of Eurodyne's room, one of them having taken up the self-appointed duty of sending me a scan of Yorinobu's status every 5 minutes, just in case something went wrong mid-transit. I'd almost appreciate the dedication, if not for the constant suspicion that most of them would prefer me either dead now that my job was done, or with my biopod shackled to the company so I was no longer an outsider they owed their jobs and lives to. Because all of us knew for a fact that everyone except Smasher would have been beyond fucked if they returned without Yorinobu still in the land of the living. Something told me things were going to be unpleasant for them as is. After the fact, instructions from Saka's Night City headquarters meant we didn't end up even fully landing in Morocco, merely pausing for a quick refuel before the AV took right back off with thrusters at full power. I preferred it that way, as the less time spent around these people the better. Their constant ogling was understandable, yes, but I was getting sick and tired of it after all of the day's stress, and so as we were midway across the Atlantic and the first rest shift was done, I decided to make good use of my company contact and promptly shoved V between myself and them. The corpo. Relax, Tengu, we are already out of the fire. She just barely kept her eye from twitching as she reassured the Arasaka operative. Your trust in the outsider is naive, Price-san. The man sent back but did back off. Finally got them off our backs? M spoke up as the man left hearing range. Valerie just sunk her face into her hands. Yeah, would that I could get them off mine. So they are this nosy with everyone. Everyone who gets the attention of one of the Arasaka family members. She mumbled through her hands. Congratulations. M tilted his head. Thanks, I think. V huffed before sitting fully back up. This whole damn thing has been a mess from start to finish. Tell me about it. The Borg somehow managed to make Metal look exhausted. At least you didn't have to deal with a suicidal man-child for days on end. No, I had to deal with a homicidal one. She deadpanned. Want to trade? Mike just huffed before turning serious. Thanks for not ratting me out at the first opportunity, by the way. I owe you one. She felt her face twist with something approaching discomfort. It was a shit situation. And you still tried to cover for me? He cuts her off. I won't forget that. She furrowed her brows. You sure? Just say the word. The certainty in his tone left her feeling just a tiny bit awkward. By the way, he spoke up after a moment. How did your group get out of the State Hall anyway? Valerie's eyes turned distant as she remembered the attack, how Yorinobu was making a point of wasting the Militech rep's time while Smasher glared him down, and how in the next moment all of them were getting drowned in bullets and killing each other without rhyme or reason. The only reason they even made it out of the room was Smasher simply butchering anything that so much as twitched in their direction. But even with a one-man army on their side, they still only barely managed to punch through the cybernetic envelopment and reach the cars, losing 2 on the way before the last catastrophic loss nearly cost them both their lives and their dignity. Hell, she probably owed M more than he did her at this point. Valerie went to say as much, but the knowing stare of the Borg made her keep it to herself. They whiled the hours away talking about random things, interrupted only by the constant status updates from Tengu, and a short scare as they flew over Mexico and a Militech air patrol tried muscling in as their escort. It only lasted for a tense minute, and V knew that with M's net-running abilities and the presence of Adam fucking Smasher, the NUSA idiots wouldn't last a second if they tried shit, but it was still nice to avoid a political shitstorm when possible. Less than an hour after that potential shitstorm, she and M found themselves looking out of a large window just as Night City came into distant view, just as the sun had started to peek from behind the horizon. Who knew she'd miss this shithole so much? Michael Margot Sobranov. The Orbital Air Space Center was an image of chaos when we landed. It had been practically invaded by Arasaka and NCPD forces, up to and including a trauma team unit waiting ready with a fully stocked medical AV that proceeded to grab Yorinobu the instant we touched down, going as far as to shove the man's own guards out of the way as they went about doing their jobs. They were appreciably professional and immediately requested I inform them of everything I used on their patient, except for the fact they did so while low-key posturing to threaten me. Thankfully, I was saved from having to deal with terminal idiocy when Smasher stomped over to me and just glared the pair of trauma team operatives into scampering off. "Fucking pussies," he growled and turned to stare me down. "Keep your schedule open. The kid will want to talk to you, or don't. More fun for me that way." And then promptly stomped away. Well, that's definitely one of the ways to tell me I'm officially on the radar. I groused to myself, but I can worry about that later. Quickly typing away a request for a Delamain, I walked over to where the strays were getting processed just in time to witness Donnie get dragged off from a hungover Kerry by an Arasaka soldier while Kimigawa was holding the rocker from trying to choke the man out. Well, at least he is back to being lively again. I shook my head and then went to check my notifications for the expected response from Dell. Except I found myself staring at something far too terrifying to disregard. Missed calls, 121. Shit. 89. Chapter 89. Back home. As much as I'd have preferred reassuring my family as quickly as possible, I was still on the clock even as we drove up to Eurodyne's North Oaks mansion, which meant a report for Rogue came first. "I see." The old woman's expression showed nothing as she processed my rapid-fire report, but I could guess at just how ridiculous she found the series of events anyways. Hell, I'm pretty sure I was still processing the entire clusterfuck myself. A few silent seconds passed before she spoke up again. "I'll start dealing with the Militech situation, and I'll want an in-person sit-rep tomorrow around 6 p.m. Sound good?" "We will be there," I assured, "if I survive that long." "Good. Rogue out." "The old bitch done chewing you out yet?" Eurodyne spoke up with a wry expression as the car slowed. "No, actually," I said and mentally flicked Delamain my thanks before getting out and waiting for the others. "But that's none of your biz," I went on, flashing him with an annoyed look. "We got you back home in one piece, and that means I no longer have to spend a second in your presence." He tried to hide a wince, but failed. "Yeah, I guess I should have expected that." "Should expect worse, you prick." Kimigawa mutters so lowly only I catch it. "Still though, thanks." Eurodyne shifts on his feet, looking all kinds of awkward about it. "You probably saved my ass 10 times over back there, maybe even before that." He says, looking away and huffing cynically, "For what it's worth, I owe you one." "Not fucking much," is my immediate impulse, but all I say instead is correct. He huffs a slightly more relaxed laugh and nods before hobbling over through his gate and then out of our sight. Satisfied, I look down at my remaining teammate. "You good?" She blinks and then instantly deflates. "No, but I'll cope." Her face twitches as she looks back at the mansion entrance. Shame I couldn't sock him in the face. I let out a short chuckle at that. As much as I'd like to blame him for everything, we both know his only real fuck-up is talking shit to Smasher. "Almost makes me think the gonk is suicidal," she mutters. And the look I give her at that makes her face twist into anger and then into a complicated mix of "I get it" and good old frustration. We stand around in relative silence for a few minutes before my war machine finally reaches us. "Need a ride?" I ask the pensive merc. She blinks, drawn from her distant stare. "Nah, I think I'll go for a walk, clear my head." "If you're sure." I hum, subtly scanning her to make sure I didn't miss any injury and finding nothing. "See you tomorrow then." She waves weakly and I get in my car. I barely so much as managed to step into my home's waiting room before a vibrating missile smashed into my center mass, managing to push me back a step despite the massive weight difference. Eee! The overexcited creature lacked even the basics of communication as it latched onto me with starts in its eyes. Feeling just a mite exasperated, I sighed and looked over beyond to find my mother standing near the staircase, arms folded and one foot tapping the floor. "Lethal danger detected." Logos buzzes in a suspiciously flat tone. "Yes, Logos. I thank you for that riveting assessment." I drawl back mentally and focus on my current assailant, returning the hug with one hand and poking her face with the other. "You all right there?" Rebecca finally stops vibrating as I flick her nose and blinks before smiling widely. Hey there, Mikey. Hey there yourself, I return warmly. You plan on letting go anytime soon? Nope. She doesn't miss a beat. Fair enough. I chuckle and look away and back to my mother. I go to speak, but she just shakes her head and turns around. Come upstairs. Knowing that to do anything else was death, all I could do was follow, Rebecca still clinging to me with a knowing and rather teasing glint in her eyes. Sit, Mom said as we entered the living/dining room, and I sat my ass down on the couch while she took her favorite armchair. Rebecca looked momentarily tempted to remain in my lap, but one glance at Mom had her neatly sat to my side instead. One entire night. Mom speaks up after half a minute of silence, and not a single message or a call. She takes a sip of her near-empty wine glass, and when you did send one, all I got was a safe-ish, we'll talk later. Do you have any idea how worried I was? Now that's just being dramatic. I was working. Working, is it? Her eyes narrow, shutting me up instantly. How is facing off against the most notorious murderer in the world for no good reason working? Of fucking course all of that was televised. I feel a sudden fatigue down to my metal bones. The VIP was a fucking gonk. And I'm still thinking about just killing the bastard when I get the chance. She cuts me off again. But that doesn't explain why you thought it was acceptable to stand between him and that monster. I gave my word. I practically grind out as my irritation spikes, and that is that. She frowns. Also, my voice rises as I see her wanting to criticize me again, even if the situation wasn't tense enough that I couldn't afford any distractions. I was flying with a fucking Arasaka exec, and I'm nowhere near stupid enough to send out calls in an emergency like that. Jammed the non-critical communications myself, as a matter of fact. Her frown deepens, and for a moment I expect her to start lecturing, but then she lets out a deep sigh and reaches over the coffee table between us, taking my still somewhat bloodied hand in her own. I just wanted to be sure you were safe. Man, I felt like a gonk now. Yeah, I exhale. I get it. I'm sorry, this entire shit show was beyond exhausting. Then you should get some rest, she says. You can tell us all about it tomorrow. A 16-hour nap sounds amazing right about now. I chuckle in agreement. I step out of the shower, now fully cleaned and half as metal, looking as usual. Sorry I couldn't bring you all of the things like I promised. I said a bit wryly. The building we were staying in kinda blew up at the end there. You actually worried over that? Rebecca looks at me like I'm the most adorable thing in the room. Well, I did promise, I begin. Before I could get even that much out, she was in my face. You fought Smasher and survived, she says with a familiar glint in her eyes, though I did not miss the slight tightening around them either. Fought is being really generous here. I snort and then give her a teasing look. Why? You looking for a play-by-play? She smirks back and gets real handsy. I think I've got a better idea. The nap could wait. My prognosis turned almost prophetic as I woke up just before noon, still feeling fatigued in ways I really shouldn't be able to feel, but otherwise mostly refreshed. I was naturally immediately dragged off to a downright decadent lunch Mom had prepared over the morning, and we managed an actual discussion instead of the high-strung mess that happened yesterday. Admittedly, I almost got snappy again after watching the news report saying the whole thing was a fucking maintenance malfunction, but it was almost to be expected at this point. The levels of corporate incompetence were beyond mortal mind's comprehension. At least my grumbling served to fully diffuse any of the previous awkwardness, even if the process of it cost me a bit of teasing. And would you look at that, after getting a proper explanation for everything, Mom agreed that most of my choices were reasonable, even if she refused to budge on the facing death himself thing. Which, fair. Rebecca was almost exclusively positive about the whole thing, though, and kept going on about how I was going to get a legend's welcome when I went to the afterlife. Like that was an actual positive. She lit up when I invited her along, leaving me frankly confused as to why the invitation would ever surprise her. But I supposed some things were better left unanswered, and so as the appointed hour approached, I made my excuses and locked myself into my workshop so I could be alone with my thoughts for a while. It was confusing in a way, the manner in which people talked about their experiences after the kind of excitement I had just gone through, you'd think I would feel more than just a bit tired. But no, I felt alive, energized, inspired even. Logos noting his studies indicated my behavior was non-standard but productive. Because of course he decided studying psychology was one of the things he wanted to do in his free time, most assuredly did not send me into a self-diagnosing thought spiral that ended up with me quite literally smacking my head into the wall to stop the overthink. Anyone who said otherwise was a liar, obviously. But I digress. The fear and terror were temporary things, easily discarded after the danger was past, like so many times it had happened before. But the experience remained. I'd been challenged and had my failings irrefutably shoved into my face by arguably the greatest living expert in the field. At least as far as the use of cyberware went anyway. I sincerely doubted Arasaka's favorite Oni dabbled much in the actual specs of his wear, aside from knowing what they did. My frame had considerable strength and durability for its size, and exceptional fine dexterity, but lacked snappy agility and speed to match it. And most importantly, I lacked the sheer skill needed to face a creature like Smasher on anything approaching even ground. The image of a blurred dragoon arm smacking my own limb away and somehow managing to almost break it apart from the inside refused to leave my mind. Countering whatever the fuck that was through either skill or tech will be a challenge of a lifetime, that much was for sure. Thankfully, as disappointing as my physical specs proved in the true big leagues, my digital specs remained impeccable. The only reason I couldn't outright counter the terrorists' mass droid hack was the fact the attack was in essence a hyper-focused daemon spam, drawing on a large chunk of a massive city's net infrastructure to perform one specific series of tasks. And even with that limitation, Logos still managed to make the little clankers decommission themselves at the end, and the orchestrator, or who I presume to be the orchestrator, proved themselves capable but not inhuman at the end of the day. All of this overthink was to say I understood exactly what I needed to work on next, and that was optimizing my musculature and getting my hands on some specialized training. But that would have to wait. I had a professional chewing out to get to. "Impressive work, you two," Rogue said, leaving both Kimigawa and myself speechless. We'd been let in through a back entrance only minutes earlier, and while Kimigawa looked as refreshed as I felt, the both of us were prepared to get yelled out my mishandling of the VIP. Instead, Rogue was looking at us with nothing but satisfaction in her eyes. "Thank you, Ms. Rogue," I answered instead of letting the silence rest, "but I feel we can't avoid mentioning some rather obvious unpleasantness that happened." She just shakes her head and smiles wryly at my serious tone. "Kerry was always a dick. I'd be surprised if you didn't need to smack him around a couple of times while keeping his ass safe." "That tracks," Kimigawa mutters, much to Rogue's apparent amusement. "What's important," the Queen of Fixers goes on after a moment, "is that you got him out of an incredibly shit situation safe and sound." She looks at me, "Even if you had to entangle yourself with Arasaka to do it. Can I expect any kind of support when it comes to that particular clusterfuck?" I ask a bit dryly. "I'll help in any way I can." She nods immediately. "But don't expect miracles. You got the worst kind of attention, save for maybe that of the Emperor himself. I have a lot of pull, and I can apply some pressure even on them, but you are going to have to get out of their grip, mostly on your own." "Sorry, kid." How encouraging. Rogue frowns, and if she was any less controlled, I don't doubt for a second she'd be slumping her shoulders by now. "You stuck your neck out because of a favor you were doing for me, and I'm not going to forget that. The Saka sitch is shit, but I know you're smart enough to get out." I resist the urge to quip a "why thank you." She pauses briefly before going on. "It was my job to organize the gig, but even I couldn't have predicted the kind of heat you would be getting in Zurich, so I'll do everything I can to make your issues with the government as smooth and simple as possible." I mull it over in my head before deciding that was probably the best she could do in the situation. "Very well." Rogue nods, satisfied, and turns to Kimigawa. "Yumiko, I'm rising your payout by an additional 500,000. That fair?" She blinks and her eyes widen before she gulps and rapidly nods, saying nothing. Seeing the reaction, Rogue exhales. "Sharp dying was my own fuck-up, girl. Don't let it get to you." "Who said it was getting to me?" She near snaps, though it comes out as more of a whine. "I'm fine." The Fixer just nods at that. Regardless, there is a small memorial that's going to be held at the Columbarium in 2 days at 3 p.m., just in case you wanted to pay your respects. Kimigawa's lips thin and she nods, while I immediately note the time down. We remain there for a few minutes longer, talking some of the minor details about what we discovered and the like, before Rogue sips down the last of her drink and says, "I've got calls to make, and you've got fans to say hello to. Again, good work, you two." Feeling a sudden hesitation, I force myself to stand up. Passing by a seemingly distracted Nix, who doesn't look at me but still sends me an info request about the whole situation, specific to the net, and we set up a meeting before I've reached the exit. The moment I step out into the afterlife proper, it is as if all sound disappeared. Familiar and unfamiliar faces turning to look at me with a mix of expressions ranging from suspicion to straight-up hero worship. For a moment I almost hoped they'd go back to their business and I could enjoy a quick, peaceful drink. But Rebecca, the little gremlin that she was, hopped on top of her bar stool the moment I walked in and broke the silence with an over-enthusiastic cheer. And like a dam breaking, I was slammed with a wall of noise potent enough to scramble my audio receptors. But seeing Rebecca's expectant look, I found I couldn't quite grumble everything away like usual. And so I decided, fuck it, and raised a triumphant hand, earning another wave of deafening noise for my trouble. The very next evening, I found myself seated in front of my computer, going over potential muscle fiber designs, using the scrap I bought off the Haitian shaman as a base, when I felt my agent buzz. It was a message from Rogue, holding the contact information of the vice mayor. Damn, did she work fast. 90. Chapter 90. Rat Business. Michael Margot Sobronov. I adjusted the collar of my fancy and overpriced neo-militaristic corpo suit for what felt like the millionth time, and made sure to keep my meat face placid as I stepped out of the mayoral office of Night City, probably still looking like I was out of my depth despite all my preparation. And honestly, after all that, I was more than happy with the distinction. Fucking slimeball, I muttered disgustedly as the conversation with the vice mayor replayed in my head. The rotund, bald man, dressed in a three-piece suit and with glasses just a bit too small for his face, was sat behind what he'd no doubt call a tastefully humble desk, made of real wood. A placid, practiced smile was plastered on his face as he saw me walk into his office. "Ah, Mr. Sobronov." Weldon Holt welcomed me with a friendly tone. "I was wondering about our mutual friend's newest prospect. You are certainly more impressive than the usual sort she sends my way." I nod and take the silently offered seat. I would hope so, considering some of my future plans. "Mr. Vice Mayor." "Please," he waves, "call me Weldon." Feeling a small part of myself die, I plastered on a smile of my own, "Only if you call me Michael." "Of course, Michael." He nodded amiably. "Now, what are these plans you have for our beautiful city?" I immediately launched into a small verbal presentation I'd prepared over a week ago, presenting myself as someone looking to revitalize the more run-down parts of Watson and help my fellow man. All of the usual empty corporate platitudes, essentially. However, the moment I mentioned cyberware, the man's expression turned a bit strained. "That is certainly ambitious," he says slowly. "Forgive me if I am a bit forward here, my friend, but you are aware of how complex and costly the cyberware manufacturing business is. Only those under the umbrella of a mega corporation have those kinds of resources." "Nothing to forgive, Weldon," I said, even as I was pissed internally. "I've spent years planning and preparing, and all that is left now is to get over some minor legal hurdles before we can get business going. You will find that I'm nothing if not resourceful before long." He was silent for only a beat before letting out a friendly chuckle. "Well, our constituents have had nothing but praise for you, and I'm always happy to see a local entrepreneur find success. Night City needs more of its own representation on the business front, I say." "On that we are agreed." I nodded along like I was impressed by his words, and should I reach such success, I will of course never forget those who made it possible. What enviable enthusiasm! He cheered a bit loudly and ejected the data shard with the info concerning my legal troubles from the back of his neck. "As I've said, my friend, I am more than happy to support local businesses, and while I respect the rights of the infrastructure companies of this city, They are keeping Watson from truly flourishing like we all know it could. Thankfully, he chuckles and types something out on his personal computer. The executive branch of the government exists for this exact reason, so you may consider your project officially endorsed by the Night City Mayor's office. Well, you've just made my year. I smiled half genuinely this time and reached for a gift bag. Please, take this small gift to commemorate the occasion. He very nearly dropped the act as he reached for the obviously bottle-shaped bag and outright smirked in satisfaction as he saw the very expensive bottle of wine inside. And then the amiable smile was back, and he was addressing me again. Michael, my friend, I believe this is the start of a most beautiful partnership. What a completely pointless bit of theatre, I groused even as I drove for the columbarium. The vice mayor is very proficient in double-speak. It's his whole career, of course he is. I mutter, still I am surprised he even bothered warning me about the other core, not liking people taking bits of their cake away. It is a bit obvious as far as advice goes, but you'd think he'd do anything to protect his usual piggy banks. I believe the term diversifying one's portfolio is apt in this case. I huffed a laugh, truly a businessman to envy that one. He no longer owes Rogue and could probably ask me to endorse him back in a few years without me being able to reasonably refuse him. And all he stakes for it is a bit of political rep. The game of politics fills me with concerning frustration. I'm unsure as to why. It's only natural. How so? I shrug. Politicians just have that kind of effect on people, I guess. That is illogical. And yet it still disgusts you anyway. How bothersome. Well, you can explore the nuances of righteous disgust in your own time. I have a ceremony to attend. Affirmative. The columbarium in North Oaks, the current spot to leave your loved one's ashes, was nothing more than an overlarge concrete shelf space shaped in a vaguely rectangular fashion. Whichever modern art student designed it, no doubt thought to make it a place of solemnity, but despite their best efforts, all I could see was just more brutalist corporate efficiency. Even the digital displays installed to show the names of those entombed here filled me with nothing but more cynicism, as all I could think of was the fact they couldn't even give everyone a space of their own, and instead crammed the shelves and made them display those relevant to whoever registered themselves at the entrance. At least the security was appreciable, I could admit that much. Even in the shithole that was Night City, the idea of some glittered-out gonk blasting their way inside and doing whatever they wanted to, the place was considered unacceptable, and so the permanent NCPD posting. The gathering for Sharp's memorial was a small one, consisting of myself, an unusually but understandably solemn Kimigawa, and a trio of older folks who seemed to be of an age with the deceased merc. I'd thought I was already over his death, but listening to his old friends talking about his life, of participating in the constant civil unrest in Britain before having enough and fleeing to America to start a family only to lose it to a corporate crossfire, made me feel deeply uneasy by the end of it. We all gave him a few words, and then Kimigawa deposited his dog tags into the shelf we paid for, and then without a word, we dispersed. The experience made me momentarily forget the meeting with Holt and left me thoughtful on my drive home and for hours after that. The negotiations for buying up the buildings I wanted lasted mere minutes with my previous preparations, and after my lawyer made sure everything was in order, I was now the proud owner of a rundown and empty factory/warehouse and a damaged residential/office building, bought for the cheap price of €20 million and a healthy dose of tiger claw pressure for a friends and family discount. Before the hour was out, teams of cleanup workers were moving in to deal with the debris, while a small-time construction firm that came recommended by Vic sent people to examine the damages and give me a statement of just what needed to be done to get things functional. Things were a hot mess for the moment, but Logos and I were still capable of estimating a timeline despite that, and in our most optimistic calculations, the work could begin within the month. The pessimistic calculations needed no mention, because we would not tolerate such incompetence while paying out in the hundreds of thousands. Thankfully, my rep as the Ripper Doc, as opposed to the Murder Tank or Net Magic Man, opened a lot of doors for me, and I'd already moved up a fair few schedules by simply offering some of my proven work as part of my payment. Apparently, people outside a very specific sort of customer were under the impression I only made custom Gen 4, or as some jokingly called it Gen 5, cyberware and refused to do anything cheaper than that. A rumor only perpetuated by me, visibly dealing with mostly wealthy patients. Now the identity of the gonk that started that specific rumor was probably going to remain a mystery to me, but if I did find them, they would certainly end up regretting opening their mouth for a very, very long time. It was Jugo. Yep. I complained at him while we were talking about my purchase, and he started laughing his ass off before outright admitting it. So I called his wife and told on him. You get what you fucking deserve, asshole. Still, the idea wasn't terrible once I actually thought about it. I could focus on making a series of cheap and reliable cyberware for the everyday buyer that my subsidiary Rippers would then install, and then focus on making custom pieces a la Malorian arms myself for the more discerning customer. It would definitely serve to stop me from stepping on too many megacorp toes before I got my proverbial business feet under me. It appears as if you are already decided. For the most part, I hummed affirmatively, really depends on just how fucked over we get by Arasaka whenever they remember I exist. The lack of corporate ninja death squad indicates their intentions are at least neutral. Or they are just waiting for my visit to get me smashed. I mutter. Unlike most of the gonks who fought the death machine, I didn't develop a sudden suicidal hatred of the man. I was far too terrified to be hateful. To the point the fucker is living in my head, rent-free. I sigh to myself, how glorious. Distraction detected, Logos says in his most serious tone, but I can't help but think he is fucking with me. Update from Assistant Yelena concerning cyberpsychosis restoration project. Subject number 4. It appears that while we were away, the subject briefly approached a state adjacent to lucidity. The state lasting for approximately 3 minutes before the subject's central nervous system began rapidly deteriorating back to its previously damaged state. We did essentially brute force the restoration on that one with nanites. I admit, still feeling a bit disappointed at the dud, even it would have made the solution for the issue insultingly simple. Any details beyond that? Mutterings were recorded, mostly concerning the subject's early life and memories. Memory preservation is subpar, even with restorative nanite treatment. Well, yes, we may have rebuilt the brain matter, but the brain signals are long gone. How? Fragile. Don't go thinking you are immune just because you are digital. I do the closest approximation of mentally tutting at him. Without your persona core, any sufficiently powerful hack could in theory do the same to you. But at the cost of physical vulnerability, should your head be decommissioned. He finished for me. What a cheerful image. I deadpanned, back on topic, what else happened to the subject? The deterioration happened at a greatly accelerated pace, following the same directional pattern as it did previously down to the micrometer. Only the increased pace and already present stress proved too much for the subject, and they were deceased within 10 minutes. Thoughts? Cursory scanning and analysis supports the maladaption theory the most. The project is low on my list on priorities and is likely to remain there for the time being, but I do have a preliminary hypothesis. That being, I lean forward on my seat atop the roof wall of one of the buildings overlooking my future factory and the work happening therein. Attempt to assist the central nervous system in restructuring itself following the cyberpsychosis-induced impulse by way of nanoswarm might offer new solutions to the issue. Or just provide a metric shitten of data even if it doesn't. I mutter with raised eyebrows. Impressive, Logos. He doesn't answer in words, but I do get the distinct impression of a preen through the mental connection. What about the other subject? Subject number 3 remains stable, but mostly unchanged. The supplements provided do not seem to be affecting any kind of restoration, save for natural neural adaptation to lack of neuron mass. Observing which was exactly the point. If you don't count the asinine hope the brain would be able to simply grow itself back, just because we gave it all the materials it'd need. We are calling it maladaption theory for a reason. There is no need to convince me. Don't worry, I'm just ranting at my previous self. I chuckle. Did Ms. Jones send anything about the next subjects? The fixer is aiming to provide another within the week. Good. We will try your idea next. Hopefully we get some actual results this time. I raise a finger before the pedantic bot can respond, and no, our goal isn't simply to gather data. These are still people. Did they not succumb to their own failings, thus turning from people to animals? Most of them do not succumb of their own will, Logos. I point out slowly. But you agree that it is their failures that are the greatest cause. Feeling a minor headache coming on, I exhale. That is the current working theory, yes. Why bother attempting to preserve them then? Why? Because it is the right thing to do, of course. I do my best impression of Rebecca's chirpy exclamations and then promptly stop bullshitting and start listing the satisfaction of success, personal recognition, personal debts as these people's savior, and last but certainly not least, mountains of eddies. The instant I mention the money, Logos responds with a, "This reasoning is logical. Of all the things he got from my imprint, it just had to be this." Sometimes my luck surprised even myself. A few minutes pass in silence as I watch the cleanup workers milling about around a slowly growing pile of crushed concrete, before my earlier concern returns full force. "Yep, your distraction expired." I inform my companion. "Why do you think V hasn't bothered calling us yet?" The corpo. "Do you understand your task?" The still tired Arasaka family member questions from his seat. "Yes, sir." V inclines her head. "Good." Yorinobu nods and closes his eyes. "Get it done, and don't make me regret giving you this trust." "I won't," she assures both him and herself. "Try not to get too wet when you do it." She flips the mountain of chrome off without even looking at him, and somehow lives to reach the elevator. Fucker was actually growing on her, she realized with a shiver. All those concerns were quickly forgotten, though, as she left the elevator and entered the counterintelligence department of Arasaka NC, ignoring the curious eyes of the many gossips surrounding her. She entered the security hallway and felt her anticipation build with each second that passed before the doors to her CO's office split open and she walked in with her head held high. Jenkins, as usual, barely even acknowledged her at first, before his mind caught up to the fact she'd only just came to report to him despite returning days ago, and his eyes immediately snapped up at her. "V, where the fuck have you been?" "Never mind." He cuts her off before she could even think about answering, "Did you manage to secure support from Yorinobu?" She allowed a small smirk to worm its way across her face. "Yes, I did. Congratulations, Jenkins." The man seemed confused for a moment before his eyes lit up at the thought of finally getting the promotion he wanted. "You are being retired." Valerie finished and shot him in the head. No alarms were raised as she walked over to the man's seat and simply shoved him out of it, taking it for her own and lounging in it like she owned the place, because now she did. And then Smasher's earlier words unceremoniously dumped themselves into the forefront of her mind, and she scowled. "That motherfu, Michael Margos Sobranov. I'm sure she'll be fine." I shrug and stand up from my perch. Forget about that. It's high time I got Vic to uphold his end of the bargain. Can't wait to see his face.